The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, can you hear me now? I'm sure you can. We'll get started in a couple of minutes, guys. That's better. Excellent. 2 minutes and we'll get started. Okay. So we've got a few more join us. Looking good. Now what I'm looking forward to, guys, if you can let me know what categories you'll be taking part in, that'll assist with today's presentation. What we'll cover is pretty much most of the standard questions for the business categories, but there's most of them cross over, especially for the major events and the events category, and especially across into ecotourism and those other specialist categories. What we won't cover is the marketing one, and the individual categories are quite different too, obviously. So yeah, if I can get some feedback on what categories we're involved in, that'd be great. Excellent. We've got adventure tourism, caravan parks, tour operators, festivals and events, cultural tourism, like ecotourism, how do I make that bigger? Okay. Now, original question we've got in there is the toolkit. Yeah, I'm assuming that's what's on the website. So have a good look at queenslandtourismawards.com.au, and there's a lot of resources on there. I'm guessing, actually, I'm not aware of an actual toolkit as such, but there's a how-to guide and other stuff on that website. So definitely have a look there. Specialised tourism services, another one we'll cover. That's fine. All the same sorts of questions today. Standard Accom, Spirit of the South. Good to see you're on board, Karen. New tourism business is slightly different too, Karen. So what we'll do, though, I think I'm going to catch up with you in the next week or two anyway. So we'll have a chat about that one one-on-one. But most of what we talk about today will cover that as well. Adventure tourism, caravan parks, self-catering. They're all similar questions or the same questions, tour operator. Festivals and events is going to be slightly different, so we might have to just cover that afterwards. Genevieve, maybe we can have a chat on the phone. But about 70% of today's content's applicable, so it's not a waste of your time. Tourist attractions, ecotourism, deluxe accom, tour operators, standard accom, visitor information centres. Now, there are some slightly different questions in that one too, so maybe we can have a chat. Leanne, is it Leanne, I think, sorry. And major festival events, we can talk about that, Leanne. That's a slightly different one again. We can give me a chat. There you go, entrant toolkit. So that'll be all the stuff that they're sending out, which is the tips and also the how-to guide is my understanding. Excellent. Well, we've got 26 online now. Breweries is the same question, so that's good. As in wineries, distilleries, breweries for Teresa. Excellent. Now, these questions aren't the easiest to read in this format, so we'll see if I can change it, but it doesn't look like it's going to let me. So if I miss a question, guys, please feel free to ask it again. Don't feel like you'll be badgering me. It's not giving me a very big window to have a look at. I haven't used this software before. Other ones I've used have given me a much bigger window. Well, morning, everyone. We'll get started. As I said, I'm Matt Smith. Yeah, you can ignore the name that's in there. I've logged in under QTIX login, so it's definitely me. So today we'll talk about tourism awards. We will, I guess, first off talk about myself and why I'm here. I've been doing this for about 7 years. Majority of that time I've been writing for the last 6 years. I judged for 3 years, or 4 years actually. I've written over 60 submissions and got feedback on them. I've read over 200 submissions, probably more than 300, I reckon, with the other ones that come through from time to time, and I have a look for people. I was Australian Tourism Awards judge for a year, and then they did change the rules that if you were involved in writing submissions, you couldn't be a judge anymore. And that, which is not a bad idea, but then they did lose some of us judges that really understood how the process was working now, not in the past. But it makes sense that you shouldn't have an involvement in awards if you're writing them and judging them, of course. Over those 6 years of writing, we've picked up 6 gold, 4 silver, 3 bronze. So pretty good results. So about 1 in 10 of what we've written has got through to be a national gold, which is pretty good considering how hard and competitive it is. It's been across a lot of categories: Indigenous tourism, major tour operator, business tourism, tourism, restaurants, and luxury and adventure tourism. So it's been a good range. Indigenous tourism has been by far my most successful, and I guess that's because it's my passion as well as the clients I was working with. And that makes a big difference too. The more passion you can get into a submission, and I'm not talking flowery language or motherhood statements or just thinking you're great and saying you're great. By passion, I mean actually demonstrating how much passion goes into the day-to-day operations, and having that come through in a written submission is key. And that's when people often ask me, should we pay someone? Should we bring someone in like myself? Yes, it's good to bring someone in. Of course, I'd say that. But at the same time, someone like me can't provide the passion. You have to. So I often say to my clients, don't worry too much. If you're going to bring someone in, you're not going to save a hell of a lot of time, because the reality is you're still going to spend a lot of time providing your passion and I guess the expertise and the insights to a writer like myself. And what you'll end up with is a much more comprehensive submission. So you're really not saving a lot of time. You're actually just building a much better outcome. And if you don't bring in a writer, don't feel like you can't win. You certainly can do well. Lots of people self-write and do well. So it's one of those things where it depends on if you've got internal skills. Now let me just have a look at some of these questions coming through to make sure I'm not missing anything. Please define what constitutes an image. I'll just get to the end of my bit and we'll get on to those bits. As I said, as judge, over the years of my 6 years of writing, I've picked up probably 35 gold awards across Queensland, NT, New South Wales. I think possibly one in Victoria as well. So pretty good strike rate there. I'm very proud of that. We work really hard to get to that. I have a few people work with me to get those results. But it does show you with 35 getting through of those, you know, we've only got about 13 of those get up at national. So the national levels is a pretty big deal. I've also judged the Restaurant and Caterers Awards. If anyone wants to have a chat about those types of things, it's a very different process and it's great. It gives you real insight into a mystery shopper type program that's all about just, you know, putting on your best front for the night, so you don't know when your judges are in the restaurant, and you basically either you make it or you break it on the night. It's very different. It's the opposite, I guess, to this process. So let me get on to a couple of these questions. What constitutes an image? Anything you upload and drop in through the image icon. So it's charts, infographics, obviously images. You can use, you can put together a collage, which I'd suggest to do for things where you don't need to see the detail too much. So I'm going to put in a couple of graphs next to each other, collage them together, and they'll go up as one image. Same as they do on the suggestions of the tips that you would have been sent out. That in, I think 1D, where you're talking about your involvement in the tourism industry, that you can collage up your logos of the different things that you're involved in. With images, you could probably put 2 together and collage them, or maybe even 3. They do go across the page nicely, considering that we're putting it into a portal, not onto a A4 page. So that actually it is wider, of course. They'll be viewing it on a widescreen monitor. But I wouldn't go too many. If you really want something to come out in a picture, I'd put it on its own. So hero images, those sorts of things, certainly put them in on their own. Judges won't blow them up. They won't have a look like that. They'll just see them as they are on the screen. They're doing it from home this time, the judging too, so they'll come together. They've already come together. They'll be allocated their teams and their categories, and then they'll go away and judge separately. So you don't know what screen they'll be doing it on. In the past, they will have been doing it always at the South Bank TAFE, which was great. It's where I judged all those years ago. We had lovely big monitors and we're all there together. So just keep in mind those sorts of things when you're thinking about collaging images or whatever you may do. If you really want, you know, we don't have a cover image anymore like we used to when we had to put in a PDF. So early on, you want a couple of big scene setting pictures, images that really get across to the judges what you're trying to sell and tell. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. Yeah, Indigenous tourism is a question there about that. There are some specific questions in that one to do with, I guess, the traditional owner's involvement in the business. It used to be back in the day, and I know a lot about this one because it has been a specialty of mine. It used to be that the business had to be over 50% owned by Indigenous people. That's not a criteria anymore, but it does have to obviously be significantly about providing an Indigenous experience, and it does have to, I guess, be approved and authorised by the local elders and Aboriginal people. But so every time they ask a question about how they're involved, that's what they're asking. What was the consultation? What was the engagement with the local Aboriginal people? Are they part of the business, or are they part of an advisory committee or panel or something like that that's had input? Is the business delivering on outcomes of the local Aboriginal community? That type of thing. We'll get into the next slide now, guys. If you have questions, keep them coming through. As I said, I may miss the odd one. Feel free to repost. Okay. Where to start? Well, you will have already, as I said, got the toolkit, which will be the tips and the how-to guide. Obviously, use Katie and any other staff at QTIC. Feel free to bother me through email and phone calls. Email is probably best this busy time of year. I'm more than happy to answer questions for anyone that's taken the time to be in one of my workshops. And accreditation is an easy one because you have to be accredited for most categories, and we'll get into that a bit later. If you don't have accreditation, you need to get it done quick, smart if you are in one of those business categories. It aligns itself completely with the tourism awards, though, so there's nothing much you'll be doing there that won't be involved as part of your submission and putting together your submission. But yeah, definitely use the tools and the people and the support provided. And don't feel like if you ring up and you're going to ask something, you think it's a bit of a silly question. There's no such thing. And this has been written, I guess, for a whole industry by a number of heads around a table. And some of the speak sometimes is a little academic or consultant-like. Some of the questions, if you don't quite get exactly what they mean and you're wondering if they apply, they all apply. So definitely ring Katie or myself or somebody, or even within each of your regions, there's people that have done a lot of awards. Even use your regional tourism organisation just to get clarification. There is no silly question. And at the end of the day, when a judge is reading something going, oh, you've just missed the point here a bit, the first thing they'll think is, why didn't you just get some clarification? So feel free to. And Katie's obviously not involved in the judging. She's just she's the coordinator. So there's no dramas in asking her things. If she needs to get a ruling, she'll go to the chief judges to give some specific feedback. Okay. Consider engaging assistants. This is, a small plug, I guess, for people like me, but also just the common sense stuff. At the end of this process, you've put 12,500 words together, picked your image, uploaded them, gone through all the layout that, not that it's such a big problem nowadays because it's all dropped into the portal, but you've put a lot of time and effort in, is my point. The last thing you want is typos and grammatical problems that to really detract from your hard work. So at the very least, I would pay someone at the end, and I do this even though people pay me, I then go out and pay someone to do a proofread of my work just to get rid of those silly mistakes that you're going to see through them, especially if you're someone like me. I always do. I remember the first submission I ever wrote, the next year I opened it up, and in the first paragraph there was a typo, and I thought, crikey, how after all those hours, because the first one you develop, of course, you spend over 100 hours on it. I thought, how did I miss that? You just do sometimes, so it's worthwhile getting someone involved. Definitely get someone internally as well involved to read over things, but definitely someone external, because they'll read it like a judge that may not come from your specific sector of the industry, and they, you might make some assumptions on their behalf, and it's good to have someone external read as well. If you do need someone to get involved and write it with you, most reasonable writers by now should be pretty booked up, but you never know. I don't have any capacity, and I know a lot of the other guys that do what I do are pretty booked up. But that said, at any time we usually have enough time to do a review or give you some advice specifically on some of the questions rather than write the whole thing for you. But certainly interview a number of people if you can, if they're available, and find the one that best suits your style and your business too. We all have our own, interests and our own passions, so have a look at that. But you don't have to have someone, that's for sure. As I said earlier, small businesses have written their own and done exceptionally well at state and national level, so don't feel like it's a must-do. Get a team together if you can, especially internally. I know there might only be one or two of you in the business, but still, you do need to share the load. It's a big, big job, and different perspectives help. And obviously, within a team, if you've got, marketing staff or sales staff or back of house staff or people, you've got your accounting team, that sort of thing, or your accountants, bring those into the process, because they will certainly bring some really good insight and be able to provide some of the information, especially your accountant will bring all the figures, of course. So definitely look at doing that, and you can become a bit of a, you'll obviously still have to do the lion's share of the work if you're the key person, but you also get to coordinate the others. I think that's key, because it is a big job, and it also allows people to understand what you're doing and to take some ownership of the process and to get their buy-in, and also celebrate with you at the end, whether you win or lose. Sometimes just getting it on paper and going, actually, we're doing a pretty good job is one of the key outcomes, and also identifying a few things you want to improve on. So read all the rules and questions thoroughly. This is a key one for people like myself. Again, if you used to get comments from your teachers at school like I did, that if Matthew had read the question thoroughly, or if Matthew had picked out the detail that was required here, he would have been able to answer the question better. A lot of our questions are double-barreled, triple-barreled, so make sure you understand what they're asking. Pull the question apart. If it's asking for 2 or 3 things, definitely answer them. And if it's asking for 3 things, then it really is looking for sort of 3 parts, 3 amounts of information that are similar in size. Not always, but pretty much. So have a look at that, and just understand that if you've got caught up answering the first part of the question and you ignore the second part, you will only get half marks at best. Seek clarification again, as I said before. I remember years ago I read a submission. It was from a really big player, and their answer for one of the questions was, "This does not apply to us." All the questions apply to you, and that was back in the days where the questions sometimes weren't written as well as they are now, and it was for a specific category where you could think that it wouldn't apply to you, but if that person had just picked up the phone and made a call, they would have realised that it did apply to them. So it can happen. All questions apply. Read all your tips. They're the first thing, especially the extra tips that have been sent out from Queensland this year. They're only for Queensland operators. They're great. They're the best that I've seen around the country, and I work across a number of states. They've got that extra level of detail, and the judges will be using them to do their marking and when they're doing their reading and going through the judging process. So definitely look at those extra tips that you should have been emailed out by now. Have a look at the questions too, as far as their ratings. That'll give you their score. That'll give you an idea of how much information. So back in the day when we had to do 30 pages, of course, if something was worth 10 points, we used to have 10-point questions, we don't anymore, but if it was worth 10, you'd know that it'd be around 3 pages. So nowadays, think about the same. So if it's worth 5 points, then it's worth about 600 words or something like that. So 10 points would be 12 or 1,250, 625 would be 5 points. Think about that. Just use it as a rough guide. You don't have to stick to it religiously, but it'll help you keep on track. The worst thing you want is to get to the end and realize that you have got 5,000 words more than you want. It's okay to have a few, and then you can go back through and quite often cull back and get succinct, which I've got a few tips coming up about how to do that. But I find it much harder to cull back than to fill out. So, but then I guess everyone's a bit different. Use your team members if you can to answer specific questions, but then make sure that you're going over them, what they've written, to make sure that it's a seamless read and that the readability is there for a judge, and that's key. At the end of the day, everything has to be really readable. It doesn't have to be super formal. It doesn't have to be like an annual report, or like I used to do a lot of government writing, so ministers' briefings, all those things. They're all very dry and very boring and sometimes a bit too formal. What you do want to write is a good story about your business that has the content that's asked for in the questions. So we'll keep moving on. I'll just see what questions we've got. Images. Sorry, consider being viewed online. 360-degree images. I don't think they will work, but I could be wrong. I would expect that they wouldn't. The functionality, I haven't tried to upload one. Obviously, video can't be uploaded, and 360 view images. I will have a check and confirm that, but I'm pretty confident that the content management system, which is very good this year, it's better than last year, they've put a new one in. I don't know if it'll handle that, but I'll have a look. So yeah, approximately, I guess, for points, 125 word per point is roughly for Genevieve's question about how to allocate them. I wouldn't get too crazy caught up in it, though. I find that the risk management question for a number of submissions that I do, it's only worth 4 points, and we end up going over that. Because especially if you're in adventure tourism or you've got any activity that does involve a high element of risk, then you need to address all that. The judges will be looking for it. So sometimes I will go over in my word count there and just try to save a little bit here and there and a couple of others. But yeah, use it as a good guide anyway. You'll find too with uploading images that this year is much more simple than last year. You don't have to upload and then drop them in. This year you just drop them straight in. You're in your field, you put your cursor where you want it to be, and on the toolbar, which we'll show later, but on the toolbar for that field, there's a little picture icon up about in the middle of the toolbar. Click on it. It'll be like attaching an attachment to an email. You then go through into your files, click on the image. It'll go straight into there. It'll be resized by the program, which last year was a lot of problem. And you can actually, when you're in there, drag it out from the corners to make it larger. And you can set it, justify it with the copy. Some people have sort of looked at trying to pop it in text boxes or do something with boxes so that you can text wrap. I wouldn't be too worried about that. The whole point of the portal is to sort of take out that level of design, to make it a level playing field for those that don't have design skills or can't afford to pay a designer. The whole point of the portal was actually to bring the content back, so we're all looking at similar type stuff when the judges are reading it, and it's actually laid out pretty similar. And the flashy stuff, which there are no points for, is not overly changing the way they mark, I guess, or influencing the way they mark. That said, readability and layout's still key, so use what you can. Know that the best submissions will still have really good layout and readability, so use your tables and make sure that your images are captioned or referred to in the copy that's around them. But yeah, consider all those things that you still want it to read well. They won't be printing them out. Judges will be just reading them on a screen. And they'll be reading them. Basically, they'll open up the field like we do and have a read. But yeah, if you have any questions more about, I guess, the portal, we can touch on that later. Okay. Alright, words in flowcharts. Words in images won't be counted. Words in tables are, words in images aren't. But also, if you put a lot of words into an image or an infographic, it's kind of contravening the rules because you're trying to, it could be seen that you're trying to get extra words in, and judges won't necessarily read them. So an infographic should have words in it, as the name says, but it should be just the highline info and the highlights of what you're trying to say, so that when you look at an infographic, it tells the story quickly, and then in your copy written around it, it should have that that detail level that you need to interpret the infographic or to explain further. So yeah, just be mindful not to put slabs of information in to your pictures. If you're doing like a screenshot of something or an example, that's fine, and there'll be copy in maybe a brochure or your website, or even a letter that you got from someone and you want to pop it in. Just understand that the judges won't go through and read the whole thing. It's probably more of an example. Here's the example of what it is, and so you need your detail written out in the actual copy that surrounds it to interpret that image or that infographic. Keep the questions coming, guys. Okay, so as part of starting, obviously the Tourism Awards process goes through every aspect of your business. So they want to know and they want to understand, all the information and all the policies, procedures that sits behind what you do, when you do it, how you do it. So that's your plans, policies, procedures, manuals, everything. So make sure that you have all these things, and if you don't have them, make sure that you start to look at what you might be missing at this point. I often start with my clients and they go, I don't actually have that specific procedure written down. At the moment, our customer service area is really 2 or 3 of us, and we do it exceptionally well, we know, but we haven't written down exactly. Well, that's fine. Let's do a one-pager up now, and let's capture the high line of what it is that if the 2 or 3 of you, or the one of you that does this customer service does it well, if you had to be off and you had to hand it over to someone else, what would be the top points that you need to make sure that they hit on? And then we can start to flesh that out, and it turns into a number of pages, but it sort of starts with capturing it, and then we can work into things like, well, what happens if there's a complaint, and we can come up with a complaint sort of policy and procedure as well. What happens if there's something outside the box? How do we deal with something when it's not something we're used to dealing with? But customer service means that we have to try and satisfy every single circumstance. We can come up with our specifics about people with special needs or specific needs or special interests, those sorts of things. That all comes into great customer service. So think about it from that perspective. You don't have a document, you probably need to have something. Develop it as part of this. It's not a big problem, and you don't need to let them know you didn't have it. As long as you've got it by the time you put this in, then that's also what the awards is about. People that have had it in place for a long time will often be able to answer the question a bit more, with more detail and more background. So that will come through in your answers. But at the same time, don't feel like you have to say, we don't have that document, or we just produced it this week or last month. This is putting a positive front on your business. You're not going to lie, but at the same time, judges don't expect you to be too honest in that respect. And by that I mean, don't lie, but this is a polished version of what's happening. So if in some cases you have to go, oh geez, we only just put that together now, that's fine. Just say we've got this thing in place. You won't have any data from the year before, so don't lie about that might have come out of it. Or any learnings, but you will say that it was instituted in the last 12 months and we're finding that it's working well and that it's going to be refined again in 6 months or whatever it might be. And a judge will read that and go, great. They'll also pick up that, you may not have had, you won't have had it before if you've said you've just sort of put it in place in the last 12 months. But better to do that than to kind of fluff and write lies, or to write, overarching statements that a judge will read and go, yeah, that's great, everyone says that, but show me the details. Show me what came out of producing a procedure or a policy, and show me how that worked. Don't be too worried about that one, but just make sure that you are putting a positive spin on everything. It is a Tourism Awards process, so you are trying to put your best face forward. But don't lie, 'cause you'll always get caught out. You'll always find out eventually, and it just doesn't ring true to a judge when you can't back stuff up anyway. Okay, develop a checklist. This is more of a administration thing that keeps you on track, keeps the people that are helping you on track, even if it's just you and maybe you're getting some stuff from the accountant and maybe one other person that's involved in the business. Then at least have that going and go, once a week at least, I need to get this information. I need it now. I don't want to get behind. I want to get this thing put together, and I need to be able to polish it and have time for someone maybe to review it at the end. In the QTA provides in the process, I think, for a pretty reasonable price, a subsidised price, a reviewing process. So that'll take a couple of weeks at the end. And also, if you want a proofreader to go through it, obviously you'll need to allocate a couple of days for that as well. So make sure, that you keep on track and use a checklist and that sort of thing. Oops. Now, this is a key one. Judges will, in most cases, have a look at your online your online environment, your TripAdvisor, Facebook. They'll have a look at your website as well as part of the site visit, or part of that sort of confirmation, even if they don't come and give you a site visit. So make sure you've had a look at those, that you're responding where you can, that what you're saying in your submission adds up with what's out there. Understand TripAdvisor, of course, is the rating is from the day dot, from the start. So we always, as my clients, and I always go through TripAdvisor for the last 12 months and see if we've got a better rating over 12 months. Same for Facebook. We have a look at that. It's a bit more new, but there's enough numbers on there now. We also use Viator and other stuff. They have to be assets, and you do have to understand they're not going anywhere. These things exist for a reason, and they're being used for a reason. I mean, also don't get too caught up with TripAdvisor. A lot of people now, and judges understand, are using it more just to see what happens when something goes wrong, rather than I'm going in to see, read through 10 5-star ratings. I might have a look at a couple of those if they're extensive and hit on the points that I'm interested in. But I'm really interested in, if something goes wrong, how you respond. And so that's where quite often people will seek out the 1, 2 stars or 3 stars if you don't have it, your lowest ratings, just to see how you responded and how you dealt with it. So make sure that your most recent lower ratings have got some response from you, that's for sure. And even some of the 5 stars, just to show that you're monitoring it, because that's what the judges are looking for as well. Don't be afraid of those processes, that are out there. The other point, I guess, that we do, and it's a good thing to do with TripAdvisor or Facebook, any of those review type things, is rather than just looking at the rating, which is obviously, just one-dimensional, we have a look at through the 12 months and try and pick out what were our key top, I guess, themes of feedback. So what were our top 3 or 4 things that people loved, and kind of box those, group those, as you do with qualitative information. And we also pick out our bottom 2 or 3 bits of, I guess, constructive or negative feedback. And we demonstrate that to the judge, and they read that and they go, that's great. You're not just, you're really embracing this platform and this process. And I can understand if you're embracing it through TripAdvisor, you're embracing it across the business all the time. So yeah, we often demonstrate that we've done that level of digging into the information that's provided and saying, well, these were our top 3 things that came back. They're loving this, they're loving that, they're loving, it's funny, like I work a lot with Uluru Camel Tours out at Uluru, and one of the key things that often comes up in their feedback is people love the personality of the camels. It's a funny thing, and I would have thought a camel was a camel, but until you get out there, and it's amazing that in 2 to 3 hours of a tour, people will get to know their animal that well, and the name of the animal quite often comes up in their feedback. And that's a key point for those guys. You might think, well, that's just one of those things. But they actually concentrate a lot on the health and the happiness of their herd. They're treated, as the key asset in the business, which they are, as important as the staff. And, they're really, treated really well. And they say that comes through in their disposition and their personalities. And that's why people always comment. So it's an interesting thing that, you can pick up all sorts of stuff from feedback. So, yeah, it doesn't always be the obvious stuff that you'd think. What's next? If you're starting for the first time, I always use dot points. I even do that now with a new submission. And then flesh out. As I said before, sometimes copying big tracks of information, big lumps of info out of plans and policies it creates more trouble than it helps, because you've got so many words that you've dropped into an answer, and they're not written for I guess a tourism board's process. So you're kind of then trying to work backwards, which I find harder than fleshing out. That's it. Definitely use your headings and your areas that are in your plans and policies and procedures, or things that, when you do a bit of research online about what's best practice about that area that you're answering, use those dot points and flesh out. And if you've had a previous submission, obviously use your feedback. Always drop that in after. Use the new tips that have come out this year. They're awesome. They will be basically what the judges are looking for as a minimum answer. I mean, don't be just restricted by them. They're pretty good. They're better than, as I said, all the other states. But I would suggest you also think, well, what else is best practice, and do a little bit of your own research if you haven't already done that in the past, and just you might already be doing it internally, but you may not know that it's best practice. Happens a lot in tourism, especially our tourism businesses that are small and lean and agile, that seem to be moving from one thing to the next. But there's always a lot of good thought behind what's happening, and the right sort of attitude that's delivering day to day. You need to kind of be able to capture that, put that on paper, what's best practice and how you're achieving that. So, and you drop that in as well in your dot points. So think about, I guess, when you're answering a question, the logical flow of that answer as well. And that'll be your dot points in your paragraphs as they flesh out. Haven't got any questions for a bit. Have I missed any, guys? Feel free to hit me up again. Any feedback? Yeah. Cool. We'll get on to a bit more of the preamble before we get into the actual questions. Accreditation requirements. Now, all categories, except for these ones, need to be, the business needs to be accredited. So festivals and events don't need it. Specialised tourism services category doesn't need it. Destination marketing, restaurants and catering services, food tourism, and then the individual ones, or the people ones about volunteers and groups and young achievers and individual contribution. That said, especially if you're in the specialised tourism services, it's a bit of a catch-all category, and that's the way they do word it, is that if you're in that one, you can't go in any of the other categories, the other business categories, because you're either in them or you're in this one. But if you are going in that because you're so specialised in what you do, I've worked with a fishing operator in the past, and we chose that category because they were so specialised in what they did. We dropped in there, but they, through their business, were also accredited. So you can still be accredited, and it'll rise you above the others that aren't. It'll raise you up when the judge is reading it. Same if you're a restaurant, you can be accredited without a doubt. In food tourism, events is a bit harder because there's not so specific an accreditation program for events. But that said, you can take from the other accreditations that are out there and use their process to even do an internal accreditation, that type of thing. Always good to show to the judges that you're understanding these things are out there for a reason and you're taking advantage of them. But yeah, if you're in any of the other categories that aren't listed there, you have to be accredited either with the ATAP program, Australian Tourism Accreditation Program, which is the yellow tick on a green background. Others are ecotourism, the star rating system. There's quite a few others. They're all on each category criteria on the front. They will list all the accreditation processes or programs that you can be part of and have to be part of to justify and to demonstrate that you are accredited. If you have any questions, if you need to be accredited now, you can get it done pretty quick if you've got a lot of those processes and procedures we mentioned before. It's a case of uploading them and demonstrating that they're in practice. And I know because QTIC administers the ATAP process, I'm working with ecotourism at the moment for another client, and they're right onto it now to ensure that the accreditation is met prior to the submission date or the application date, which is I think 21st of August for Queensland. So yeah, as long as you're accredited by then, you're fine. Okay, changes for this year. Very minor changes, which is great. And they're just descriptive changes for 3 of the categories. Specialised tourism services, they're looking for, I think the only extra comment in there was that they've said you can't go in any other category, as I mentioned before. Self-contained, I think, is the same. So if you're in self-contained, you can't be in deluxe or standard or luxury, those sorts of things as well. You can only pick one. New tourism business, not exactly sure what the change is there. I'll have a look towards the end and we can touch on that. It's always been pretty standard, though, that if you're new to tourism business, it means you've started trading in the last 12 months. So you don't have a full 12 months of operational figures. So if you started just before the financial year, last financial year, the one we're in, once it started, then you're not a new tourism business. So you have to have basically an incomplete full year worth of data and trading to be a new tourism business. If you have a full year, then you've got to pick one of the other categories. We'll have a look at that description later on, but you won't have been in it before anyway because you can't go in this category twice, so it shouldn't make any difference. You won't be, as long as you're not reading an old criteria, make sure you get the latest one off the website. Okay, business writing tips. Now this section's probably more just stuff that I've learned over the years and stuff that's really important to ensuring I guess the readability of your submission, which is key, and just maximising your chances to cut through with the judges. Now, understanding your audience is key with any sort of writing or even this sort of process that we're doing today. You have 3 judges. They'll be from varied backgrounds. Majority will be from the industry, almost all. There may be 1 or 2 from sort of allied industries. In the past, occasionally, like a sponsor will send a judge along, and I don't think we have any that are crazy outside the industry, but we used to have like Host Plus and people like that. I think businesses like that were sponsors, so they'd send someone along, and of course they're involved in the industry, but they're not involved in the business like you guys are. So understand that you may have a judge that isn't completely aware, so make sure you're not assuming things. As I mentioned before, this year they've come together to do their sort of catch up and briefing. I think they have their groups already allocated, but they'll do their judging apart, which is something to consider. They'll come back together at the end for deliberation and talk about compare their marks and their comments. So they'll have that sort of level at the end of coming together to make sure that nobody sort of got crazy. The other great thing about Queensland is they have a scribe for each group of judges. They don't do this in any other state that I'm aware of. And a scribe's it's a uni student or someone that's basically interested in the industry and happy to volunteer their time. They're all volunteers, of course, the judges as well. So we have to take that into account as well. But the scribe sort of keeps them on track in Queensland. It's great. It just makes sure that everybody's sort of judging, that if anyone's getting their points and their comments are way sort of different to the other 2 judges, then the scribe might raise that and go, can we just confer on this before, so that the last day is not jam-packed with too many things that could have been picked up before. And also make sure that our feedback's better in Queensland. And I think the last couple of years that's shown it's coming through much better. I know years gone by and in every state feedback's been a bit of an issue. Judges quite often can point out something obvious that's missing. And when they couldn't, when you've done a pretty good answer, you'd often get good answer, which used to drive me crazy because it doesn't give you anything. You don't know how good it was. You don't know what was missing. You don't know what bits were good. Often judges too will say to you, well, you need this extra detail, this extra information, but they don't often tell you what to drop out if you're at the level of you're already at your 12,500 words. So it's not a perfect process, of course, but it's getting better and they are working towards it, and those tips will help us and help the judges as well. Understand your judges too, now that they're doing it by themselves away in their own time. They're probably fitting some of it in around their work and family commitments. So understanding that, what we need to write has to be engaging and interesting will really cut through. It works sort of for us as much as against us if we can nail that readability. If they've had a long day at work and they come home and they're doing a few submissions, writing a really good submission that cuts through quickly in their mind will really help them. Much like if they're taking a whole day out and doing it on a weekend and you're the first submission they read, they're starting the day on a good note if they're reading your submission and it's nice to read, got a good story to it, but also hitting all the points that they're asking for. So just think about that as you're writing. I often think about too that I've got a couple of judges that I think are going to be pretty good, and they're going to be they've been around. Often we find too people with the time are usually a bit more older, or they're consultants that can take the time to do this. But I also consider that there's a judge that knows a fair bit about marketing, so I need to sort of nail the basics of marketing for them. And also consider sometimes I've got a judge that's probably a bit left field, so I'm thinking, what's the crazy judge thinking at this time when I'm writing an answer? What will push a creative type person's buttons rather than maybe a consultant linear type person, which is what I am, where I'm just answering questions logically and filling out the basics and then trying to layer the exceptional stuff on top of that. Sometimes people are just looking, some judges look at things very differently. So I always sort of factor that into my thinking when I'm writing and reading my questions. Okay, now this is just something that I do, and it's not something that everyone has to do, but I do an overarching vision for the submission. This is great too if you've written a few and you think, gosh, am I just going to write the same sort of thing? Am I just going to update it? This for me sort of in a nutshell can encapsulate what was different about this last 12 months and what am I going to present as my high points. It doesn't have to be about, we did wonderful, great, a huge amount of innovative things or spent a lot of money or did all this. It could be that it was a year of consolidation because in previous years you made a few changes. But then you come up with how it was consolidated, how it was a good year, how you refined things rather than did brand new things, how you demonstrate it throughout, identifying your key messaging. So sort of saying, so that you've got a theme coming throughout and the judge is getting that. So they get to the end, they go, that was a good submission. I got what they were trying to tell me and I got its point of difference as a submission as well to stand out from the others. I do have a point there, don't repeat yourself. You can repeat the same sort of word now and then, but yeah, not whole tracks of information, I guess, or whole slabs of a statement that you want to make throughout. Judges don't, they want to see the same thing talked about in different ways as appropriate, and you will do that. When you talk about something really significant for the year, it'll come up in 1A because you want to highlight it as a key milestone or achievement. Then it'll obviously it should be in your business plan too because it was a key thing, a key outcome for the year, so it must have been planned for and actioned. And then it should come up in the business area. So if it's an environmental change or even a customer service one, then obviously the detail goes in there. And if it was innovative, which a lot of new stuff is, or something you're going to say you achieved across the year, then it goes in the innovation question. But in that one, you just talk about why it was innovative, not the detail that you will later on. So it could come up in 4 areas, the same, I guess, initiative or project, and that's okay, as long as it just doesn't read exactly the same 4 times. Judges will go, you missed the point of why you're putting this in here. It needs to be in this section from the innovation point of view, or it needs to be in this section from the detail point of view of the procedures and processes. It needs to be here as just an achievement and an outcome that you're highlighting for us at the start. And in the business plan, obviously, it's very dry. It's just dot point stuff because your business plan obviously is going to cover everything. So it's not any detail much in a business plan, and it should be just maybe your key measurables in your outcomes column. But we'll get to that as we get to the business plan. But that's just something I like to do, have a vision for each of the things that I'm writing. Here's a bit of a point that early on I never really considered too much until I was sitting there with the judge that went, this passive voice is driving me crazy when they were reading. This is back when we used to sit next to each other. And it was an academic judge, and I didn't quite understand what she meant. So I asked, and she said, passive voice is sort of writing it without, subject, the verb and the object. And again, she kind of lost me a little bit. But the more we discussed, and then I did a bit of research, the more I understood. And there's an example there on the slide. It was determined by the team the experience could be improved. That reads okay to me. And if you think about it, it's actually not a bad line. But if you then think about 12,500 words and all those sentences, if you write that sort of way rather than the team determined the experience could be improved, which is more succinct and to the point, and it puts, subject, verb, the subject's the team, the verb's the determined, and the object is the experience being improved. That type of writing gets you to your point quicker and is easier to read and increases your readability. Don't get too carried away with getting worried about it, but if you can start to think, well, I can write things more succinctly, then the readability goes up. The judge sort of gets to the point quickly, understands it, and after 12,500 words, they'll go, I really quite enjoyed reading that, even if it was a little bit, because some of the business areas we're going to cover are a little bit dry. But yeah, you can get to the point, and especially when you're writing a statement like that too, which is a bit of a setup statement. It's a bit of a statement talking about what the preamble of what something. So it helps you get to the point, the really exciting stuff, which is what you did, and then how you measured how good it was and how it was received. So that's the stuff that really pushes the judge's buttons. So think about active and passive voice. You can have a look online. There's plenty of stuff online about it. I wouldn't get super worried about it, but it's a nice thing to learn, and I'm still sort of learning as I go, and I'm still finding passages in some of my submissions that are still a bit passive, so I'm updating them as I go from year to year. As I said, don't get super worried about it, but it's good to try and learn that skill if you can. As important, and this is something that I've had to learn in the last probably 2 or 3 years, storytelling's coming through. And I know from talking to a few other writers and a few more businesses actually, because this is something where writing it yourself, the storytelling aspect will come through quicker than if you engage someone like myself, because I don't know the story like you do. I don't know the ins and outs of it and the passion behind it. And I just don't know the story, I guess. I can learn bits by coming and doing a site visit with you, and we can discuss it at length. But that amount of time doesn't give you the insight that as a storyteller, as a writer yourself, you'll be able to impart. So it's an important part now of the readability. Again, I'll keep using that word because people often say to me, do we need to, how formal, how, should I get someone to a formal writer? No, storytelling is actually a little more informal, and it's something you'll be able to do. So just think about the readability that comes through from storytelling and hitting your high points and getting your content in and leading the reader on a story. Don't embellish though, and don't make motherhood statements. Now, a motherhood statement is saying we're great at something. You can say you're great at something, and you will throughout the thing, or we've achieved this at something. If you then don't back up how or why you achieve that, you do have to wonder. The judge's going to read it and go, I get it, and I actually believe you, but I can't give you lots of marks or points for that because you haven't told me how you achieve it. You haven't told me what makes you great. You might go, we're great at this, and here's a bit of guest feedback that confirms that. That's great, but we don't know what happened in the middle. Did you just luck it? How do you make sure that every interaction's the same or every outcome's the same? How do you make sure every person in the organisation is delivering at the same level? So that's that backing up of things. So don't use motherhood statements and embellishments. Early on in 1A, you can use a bit of, some of your verbs and creative language and that sort of thing, and adjectives, not verbs, and then talk about, in 1A, because it is a bit of a snapshot of the whole business and to get the juices flowing. But in most of the other areas, you won't use a lot of those sort of adjectives so much. So I want to know, you say you're great at something and that it's important because of A, B, C, D, E, and this is how we carry it out. And then this is how we measured it, and here's some refinements that we put in place. That's a good answer, and that's what a judge will read and go, I get it. Well done. Another point, I guess, on writing is probably more appropriate to the earlier one. Keep sentences clear and concise. 20 words is a bit of a gauge. I don't get too caught up in it, but if you've got a sentence and you think, geez, that's pretty long, and you count it and it's 40 words, it's probably 2 sentences you can make it. Get to your point early too. Lead with your strength. Again, that's that positive. That's positive rather than active rather than passive voice. But use that as a bit of a guide too. Have a look online. You can learn these sorts of things. But again, don't get too caught up with stuff that you can learn online. A lot of it's written for marketers to talk specifically to the consumer. That's a different type of writing than what we're doing here. And that's what makes it, I guess, a bit of a specialty writing these tourism awards. It's, we're not marketing ourselves to a consumer. We're marketing ourselves to an informed judge. So we do need to back everything up. So when you are online, having a look, reading about stuff, just be mindful of the source. Sometimes it is all about the customer, who you're writing for, and that's not always appropriate. So just keep that in mind. Responses need to flow logically. It's a bit like I touched on earlier, that you state why something's important and give a bit of detail as to how it sort of sits and fits in the organisation. And then you go into how it's rolled out consistently across the organisation and on a day-to-day basis. And then you go into how that's, assessed, monitored, and how you work out if you're achieving your goal or not. And then, as I said, if you can always drop in a bit of an example of refinement in that space, how you got better at it, and a good case study or a bit of guest feedback or something along those lines, that's a good structured answer that flows logically as well. It's well structured. Now, this is another thing that it comes up a bit, and you tend to, after reading as much feedback as I have over the years, you tend to realise that quite often you'll answer a question, you'll state you did something really well, but it actually raises another question in a judge's mind, or you state that you're doing something that's as close to best practice as you can. An example was, one of my guys says we use bore water for all our outdoor rather than any of the drinkable potable water, which is obviously got to be go through a process. But one of the judges one year went, okay, so you use bore water. What is that doing to the source, the water table, the aquifer, wherever it's pulled from? We thought, actually, we haven't answered that. And really, as a business, it's not really our area to be too worried about, because that's done by the local water authority. But that was the answer that the judge was looking for too, that we understood that the local water authority monitored, and we'd put it in. We hadn't just put in a rogue bore, we'd put it into to the existing standards and met all the criteria, and it was signed off, and we were paying for the water, as you tend to do with all these things, and that they were monitoring the water source. And that's all we needed to pop in, was just a little bit of extra information. Same guys. We also last year we got a comment from a judge that this is out at Uluru, that we don't wash the buses down daily or even weekly if we don't need to, because it's a waste of water, and a bit of red dust is not a problem. It's expected. But last year, one of the judges went, well, I'm a bit worried about first impressions and how dirty these buses are. And I sort of said to my client, well, yeah, that's a bit harsh, but we haven't, we've created the question in the judge's mind, is this really best practice? And my guy went, actually, well, we use the brooms to dust them every couple of days. You should use those big brooms and go around and dust the bus so that they get the most of it off. And I went, well, actually, that's probably the answer that they were looking for too, the bit of extra information. So instead of using water, which is obviously a tight resource out in the desert, we would come up with another solution, which was dry cleaning, using the dust, using a broom, and also just spelling out that yes, they still were washed usually once a month, because usually there was enough rain once a month just to put a bit of mud on the vehicles. But just tell the whole story, and then we would satisfy that judge. And they may not have taken a lot of points off for a minor thing like that, but they could have. You never know, because you don't obviously get the points back. But yeah, we kind of looked at when you don't want them to be distracted by the one thing that ended up in their mind at the end, which was negative. When you wrote, 5 or 10 things that were so positive and great, and they got that, but then they got left with the negative thing. So you kind of want to get rid of those buts, or those, I'm not comfortable about that, or now you've raised this question in my mind. So just consider every time you put something in, have I created another question here that the judge will want to know more detail about? Or have I answered the whole thing? The whole, I guess, answer is complete, and I haven't left something open for the judge to consider. Okay, I just want to check. I haven't got any questions for a while. I'm assuming you're still out there. Oh, sorry, maybe I missed a couple. In terms of accreditation, what is the difference across recognised programs? The difference, most programs are pretty similar. There are some that are very specific for accreditation. There's like a China Ready program that's on the list, so it's specifically about being ready for China. I haven't gone through that program, but I assume it asks for all the basic business stuff and then specifically cultural stuff about the China market. Another question there was about the Australian caravan. Yeah, they've all just come through now. Sorry guys, the questions have just started to come through now. Caravan Industry Association. I think that program's part of it. Have a look on the front page of your criteria, and it'll tell you. I think it's sufficient, but if not, then have a look on there. Then you will have to do one of the ones that's on that list. Let me have a check. I've got some other questions here. No. Do judges review last year's feedback to see if it was addressed? No, they don't. They can't. And they're not asked to. They've got to review each submission standalone for the 12 months. If they know too much about the submission from previous, they can't judge it objectively. In a perfect world, we'd have the same group of judges, and they would probably follow you on a journey, but they just can't provide that. And the feedback from the year before can be so subjective to the 3 judges that it doesn't always ring true. Not saying that it's wrong, but it can be skewed. Sometimes I will have to ring up because I've read a lot of this feedback, and I'll go, this bit of feedback here doesn't make sense, or I just don't like it. I don't think it's right, and I'll ring up the organizer and go, do I put this down as a bit of a rogue bit of feedback, or do I take it as rote? And we'll go through it, and they'll often go, yeah, there's something there to be learnt. And I'll say, yeah, I picked up what needed to be learnt, but I don't want to rechange, the whole question, rewrite the whole thing. When I think, I can pick up one thing there, but the rest of it's probably just a bit too skewed. And often we'll decide that, don't do that. Don't throw it out. Because from one year to the next, and from one judge to the next, you can find something you've written they'll love, and the next judge, and especially back in the day where they didn't rationalise the feedback, it wasn't uncommon to have one judge saying, I love this, it's a perfect answer, and then the next judge going, that was good, but I wanted this, this, and this, and then the other judge being indifferent. You'd end up with 3 very different bits of feedback, and you'd be sitting there going, I don't know what exactly to take on board here. They've tidied that up in Queensland with the scribe and with these tips now, which is great, but they don't look at last year's feedback. And if they know too much about the business, they have to declare a conflict of interest, because they really shouldn't be judging it, because they can't know enough about every business in the category. So they can't be fair and objective. Much like, I guess, if there's a new entrant in a category, then there's obviously no feedback from the year before. That can work for them or against them. So they just take out that you don't look at the feedback from the year before. I hope that answers that question. It's just to keep the objectivity in a, I guess, limited program like we have. Okay. How many submissions are a group of judges given? They'll be given the category, and so each category will vary from. The lowest might be 2 or 3. I mean, if any year, if you see that there's only a gold and silver or just a gold awarded, usually it's because there's only 1 or 2 in the category. Sometimes it's because the others didn't come up to standard, and the judges do have to put their foot down and go, I'm sorry, but there was only 3 in this category, but the last one didn't get to a standard to be judged as a bronze. A bronze has to have a certain amount of, credibility, as much as, you don't just make up the numbers, or even a silver. So, but in most cases, they're written fairly well, and they will qualify for if there's 2 in a category. Other categories like attractions, tour operator, I think are the 2 biggest usually, could have as many as 20 applicants. So a judge will be given, 3 judges will be given that category, and what will happen is that they'll have to work through that over a few days, whereas others will be given, one category that's got 3 in it, and then they'll be given another category quite quickly. Often, judges are matched up with a large category, then maybe a small one to help them get through it. Because after a large one, it can be, it's quite tiring at times to be reading the same sorts of thing over and over and over for 20 submissions. And then they'll probably back it up with a smaller category so that they can, they don't have the same issue again, or a completely different one where they do the marketing category, which is completely different questions, or they'll break it up with giving them an individual category, so, outstanding contribution, that sort of thing. The judges do get a lot of submissions at times, but basically they're just given the same amount, I guess, across the process. They try and some groups are quicker than others. I judged with an academic once, and my God, she could read, and she rarely missed anything. She didn't miss any more than the rest of us, and she could read twice as quick as any of us. She's amazing. But then that was her, I guess, her gig being an academic. As far as what have we got here? Okay, sorry. First time entrant here. Do the judges visit for accreditation submission? If yes, are they like mystery shoppers? No. The judges declare. For accreditation, you may get a site visit, you may not. It does depend on the program and who's available. They usually do to begin with, but I have heard of a couple of occasions where they've gone, we'll give it to you off this, and we haven't got a judge in the region just yet, so they'll do the visit a bit later. It does come down to, the logistics and budget and that sort of thing. But for the awards, if you're getting a visit from a judge, which most people do. Some of the categories where there isn't any points might get a Skype call or a phone call, but all categories with points allocated will get a visit from a judge, and they will book it in with you. They will plan it. They will. You'll know exactly when they're coming. You should ask the judge exactly what they want to do, how much time, if they'd like to go through the paperwork first, or and then do the experience after, or do the experience first and then sit down with the paperwork. They should send you a list of exactly what they're looking for. There shouldn't be any, I guess, as I say, Gordon Ramsay moments. It's not about catching you out and swearing at you and really judging you. This is actually more of a confirmation process that the policies and procedures that you will mention in your submission actually do exist and are in operation. They also want to just check that the business is operating, understand that all these statements about how great and wonderful you are backed up by the judge's first impressions. They will go on the website and have a bit of a look. They'll do a bit of that where, like a general punter will understand a bit about how to find you. They'll check out your sense of arrival, the car parking if appropriate, how to find you, all that sort of stuff as part of their site visit process. But you will know they're coming. You'll definitely know they're coming, so don't be afraid. And if it's a time when they ring and go, we want to book in a time, if it really doesn't suit, feel free to push back a little bit and just go, I'm really sorry, but the key people, myself or whoever that I need on board to do this, are off that day because of illness or family commitment or something that cannot be moved. Try and work in with your judge as best you can. But at the same time, they have to work in with you because it isn't a mystery shopper type setup. So, and if it's something that really can't be worked through, the judge should usually just go, well, can't do that date, not going to work. I'll go back to Katie and see if we can get another judge to do it at a time that suits you. It should be all a positive experience, so don't get too afraid of the site visit. Yeah, we can talk more about that. Keep sending the questions through, guys. Another point, I guess, with everything, and I've said this throughout, but it needs to be stated, back up everything that you say with an example or figures. Judges are looking all the way through just to see that it's evident that you are tracking how good you are at whatever it is you're doing. And there are figures for everything. So if you think even like, so for your HR section and your professional, your training, professional development, you think, I can put down how much was spent and how many people took part, but you can then also talk about outcomes, which were obviously staff satisfaction in a staff survey, and other things like staff turnover. And there's usually benchmarks for those. There's labour force reports that are out there. I think the last one was done in 2012, so it's getting a little out of date, but it was done by the government. It's out there, so you can find a turnover figure for your region. All regions in Australia were done, I believe. You can also look at things like length of service as a measure, number of people that were awarded, with whatever rewards you might have in place. All those are measures that you can then, we've just come up with 4 or 5 or 6 different measures just for HR policies and procedures and activities. So everything can be measured. Just think of that way and think an outcome measured, not just that we did it and this many people took part. We did it, this many people took part, and then there was no compliance issues. So in a trading issue, or our customer service was improved from 4.4 to 4.6 out of 5. All those sorts of outcomes. So it's not that you did it, and the outcome isn't that you did it. The outcome is then what resulted from doing it. So always think that too. Think to the logical outcome, and it's usually a guest involvement sort of thing. So OH&S or workplace health and safety. The training's about safe practices. So how many incidents were there with staff? How many incidents were there with guests? How many days lost with staff? How many sickies were called? There's another thing for staff. There's so many ways you can measure how you're doing in a space, and that should apply to everything you're doing. So just think about that, and that's the sort of thing the judge are looking for best practice. Let me just check, see if there's any other questions. I haven't got anything new through for a while, guys. So there might be a lag in the system, but we'll see how we go. What time have we got? Okay, we'll keep pushing ahead because we've got a bit to get through, and here we get into the crux of the questions. As I said, for those that have got the new business or the festivals and events categories, these questions are slightly different. Feel free to pose your specific stuff if you like, and I'll answer that as we go, or at the end to get in touch We can do it over the phone even, which is a bit more, conducive to back and forth. But yeah, feel free to use whatever method you need, because I will be going through the general business questions at this point. But I definitely want to be able to cover what you need as well, guys. Okay, question 1A. Don't worry about the exercise on this page. This is something that if you do want to do it in your own time, feel free to do it. We won't have time today to cover it, but it's a good thing to start with. 1A is always my starting question anyway. I guess the point here too is that that's logical. We start with 1A, but don't always start with 1A. I do 1A and then 2A. Question 2A is my first two questions, but then I make sure at some point in the process I go to 5 and I do 5 just standalone. I'm just sitting there giving it the time that it deserves, because 5's only 3 sub questions in most categories. It's still worth a total of 20, so it's 6, 7, 7, I believe, or 7, 6, 7, one or the other. So they're big point questions, so you never want to leave 5 too late or get the end. It does come through, and it is a trend when you're reading these as a judge to understand that question 5 sometimes is, you can tell the writer, the entrants run out of puff a little bit. It's a long process. And if you keep starting at 1A, you'll refine 1A all the time, and then further on, and as you go through, you do tend to give less attention. So definitely start with 5 at one point during the process and allocate as much time as you have to any other question. And maybe do that a couple of times. Do the same for 4, the customer service one, or 3, the marketing one. The marketing one's often a bit difficult too for operators that are often very good at the doing, but not so good at the telling exactly the research and the information behind marketing and how it's working. So definitely, don't just do 1A all the time. But I start with 1A, 2A, and then I might go to different questions at different times. 1A sets the scene for me, so that's why I start with it. It's that vision that I would have written earlier, and I expand that. So I make sure we demonstrate eligibility is the first thing, and then the other 2 things that demonstrate the nature and the history of the 3 things they ask for. As the points in this, as they will say in your tips that you've got in front of you, hopefully. The eligibility in most cases is as simple as saying, I'm a tour operator, I'm a this, I'm a that, and where, if it's not that simple and you actually can go in multiple categories, then spell out what makes you, an adventure experience, or ecotourism, which is quite specific. Ecotourism is a really specific and probably, I think, almost the hardest category in a lot of ways to do, only because of the nature of tourism, and that the whole questions are about, in ecotourism, putting the environment on the same standard as any other outcome in the business. So it has to be considered as far as viability, as far as customer satisfaction, as far as anything. The environment has to be as important, and you have to be doing great things in that space. Lady Elliott won it last year, I believe, and they're almost 100% self-sufficient nowadays. They're getting very close to it, and that's the sort of thing that you'll be against in that space. Not saying you can't do it, but you have to be considering every element of the environment. But in this one, if you're just doing a standard business one, state what you are. That's your eligibility. By the nature, they're talking about what it is you do. So just a quick, and 1B is all about the actual specifics of the products. But here you're just, telling we do these types of tours, it's 3 or 4, or we have these type of accommodation, or we have this type of activities that we do. And you just state what they are, but not in detail, because that comes later. Where it is, and the who, what, where, how, all those answer that. So how many staff are involved, the types of things that they might do, even touch on maybe who your target markets are, your key people. At this point, it's a bit of an overall, I guess, a snapshot of the whole submission to come is the way I look at it. Need a good map, as the tip says. Make sure you have a good map. It's to the point now where, especially if you get through to nationals, where judges want to see a really good map, one that you should have for your consumers anyway. Most businesses, if not every business, should have a really good map that speaks to their consumers, so it should speak to the judges as well. Make sure on that map that it does identify usually your closest capital city, maybe key airports, that type of thing, that if they're important to the business, so that the map's telling that story as well straight up. And then in the history, you go back to day dot. If the business was owned by someone else back in the day, you still touch on who they were when it was. Not a lot of detail. You just got to touch on maybe key milestones along the way. Use an infographic if you can, what we're doing with a couple of my guys this year. And we haven't always done it this way, but when you get to nationals, they do quite often ask for something a little bit fancier than just writing dot points down the page and what was, your key milestones. I think it's a little bit, asking for a bit of flash, but, if that's what they want, that's what we'll give them. And it can be just a timeline across the page with a couple of things up and down, key points with what it was, and then the detail will be underneath in your copy. And so far, if you're doing that, you've kind of got a map and a timeline type thing, milestone timeline. I think that's 2 images you've used already. Obviously, you want a hero image in there as well, and often a bit of guest feedback. So you could use a few images up in this 1A, but it's worthwhile if it helps you really set the scene well and gets in the judge's mind exactly what it is you are, which will then help you with the other questions to come because they've already got that background. Make sure you're authentic throughout this process. I always like to set the scene from the start that we're not going to try and snake oil salesman the judges. We're going to be honest and upfront, and it's about content and a good story. And if there's something that we can talk about that was a challenge in the year, we try and drop it in. If it was significant enough to go in 1A, just so the judges read all this great, glowing, good stuff, but also, great, I'm going to be in for a true depiction here, and I'm forming a relationship with you from what I'm reading because you're being very honest and constructive with me. You need to basically stimulate interest throughout this whole question, though, because by the end of it, you want the judge going, I really like this. 2 things you want them to do. I really want to read the rest of this submission. I'm looking forward to it. And I want to visit there. I want to do this. I want to take my family, or I want to, whatever it is that you do, I want to do that. They're the 2 things you want at the end for them to be thinking. And they want to understand your business story and they want to come and experience it, basically. Let me have a look and see what the questions are on that one. Okay. We only purchased the business 3 months ago, 5 months time. Is this sufficient length of time to refer to? Should we refer to any statistics we have from previous ownership now? Yeah, you definitely need to if you can, and it is a difficult one if you've only had the business for the 3 or 4 months prior to the end of the financial year. Ideally, when you've been, when you purchased the business, you will have been given stats, and hopefully they're pretty factual and been ethically produced and given to you during the sales process. You do need to be able to compare, and it's a great opportunity for you to be able to show, even in a short amount of time, the changes you have made. But you will have to, where you can, refer back to previous activity. And it might be only a highline that you got to see and not all the specifics. And you can state that very early on in 1A and talk about, and a couple of key milestones of when the business was established. You can talk about who it was, but not a lot of detail. I mean, you don't want to be, it's not about them, but it's also just setting the scene for the judges. What were the key milestones? You will have learned a bit through the purchasing process about where it's come from and where it's got to by the time you purchased it. And that could be just a couple of points. And then into your time, your 3 months, and maybe key stuff that you've done in the 3-4 months, which might be a bit light on because it's not a long time and you're really just getting your feet on the ground. But you will have to demonstrate that to a judge, whereas other businesses will be putting in a few things they did across the whole year, and maybe a couple of key milestones from previous year under history that will inform what's to come down the track. It is another good point, actually, that often people say to me, it's only on the financial year, so I can't talk about anything that happened before or even stuff that's in train that is going to happen after. Well, actually, that's not true. You will get the odd pedantic judge. I got one last year that said to me in one of the submissions that I had a hand in, we don't need to know that detail. And it was about a solar commitment from a business. And I went, well, actually, you do, because while we put in 150 panels this year, we had to let you know that was on top of the 400 or 500 panels or whatever it was that were already in place, and that the total was this many. So you do have to talk about what's come before, but only in context setting. You can't just take, we put in 400. We put in solar 3 years ago. You can't just state that and go, the soul that was put in so and so is now. And this year, the benefit was this much renewable energy. And in fact, and in this year we extended the program as, using that example by putting an extra whatever, blah, blah, blah in, and we've already purchased for next year and committed to purchase another so many panels, which will then take us to be 90% or 30% or 80% renewable energy. So you can talk about the past and the future. I don't talk too much about the future, but if it's good context setting stuff and showing the journey the business is on, I will mention it, but probably aligned. The judges will give really all their points about what you did in the year, but if that in the year can be enhanced by telling about where you've come from, then definitely talk a bit about the past as well. So I hope that answers your question specifically about just having the business for a few months. Sorry, it's hard to even see names, Bianca. So if you do have any specifics about that, feel free to give me a yell after the session, Bianca. My details are on the last slide. When we get there, you'll have my phone number and actually no, just my email, but I can give you my phone number as well. Guys, yeah, it is a challenge in the first year just to write a good submission if you've only had the business for 3 or 4 months, but I'd still say do it. As I say to all my clients, even when we start early and they're spending a lot of money on me and a lot of time and effort on themselves, it's a 2 to 3 year proposition to put a really good submission together. And that's not just to try and get the work myself for 2 to 3 years. It's the fact of the matter. They're big things to put together. And when you're starting from scratch, 12,500 words to nail, even with all the time in the world, and it's still hard, and you want that feedback, and we all get better at putting it on paper. By the second year, and you start with the first year, the second year you've already 50-60% there really, because you're not changing the basics that you're still doing. You're changing, you're improving, updating, that sort of thing. So I'd certainly have a go even if you've only had the business for 3-4 months, knowing that for next year you'll have a really, really good sort of red hot go at being able to position and demonstrate the business as an award winner. Okay, question 1B. This is the nuts and bolts question, I call it. It's about product, services, and experience, or products, experiences, and services. Answer it the way that it is in the question. They've mixed that around now and then, but the question's exactly the same. I use 3 headings. I use tables for products and services. Experiences you can do in a table as well, but it gets a bit table heavy, this answer. But I tend to put that then in paragraphs. So by products, we're talking about the specific stuff that people buy. So by that, it's what it is on the website that they click on and purchase, or if they pick up the phone and ring you, what it is that they purchase. So you're talking there, if you're a tour operator, I've got 4 or 5 different tours that I sell. Here's the nuts and bolts of them. They go this amount of time, they go on these days, they cost this much, and here's the basic itinerary. And the inclusions. That's your product. Your services are the things around it. It does say in your tips, and this is where I don't completely agree with the tips, but make sure you do factor this in. They go about tangibles, intangibles. Services can be tangible. They're not always. I put in there car parks and toilets and stuff like that because they're not a product, but they're a service you provide your guests. But it is the intangibles as well. So any advice, tourism information, anything else. I guess the service is the interpretation on a tour or anything like that as well. Though it's a key part of the product as well, and a key part of the experience, of course. But yeah, I always put in there things like if you provide internet, if you provide, like I said, toilets, car parks, a fully functional, booking website, that type of thing is a service. What else do we put in there? We do go into, I work with AAT Kings, we talk about the coaches, as in the standard of their coaches and the amenity of their coaches. We talk about the guides and their training and their experience as a service. We talk about what else we put in there. Language services we put in there. I think that's most of the things, the services. The product is what you buy. The services is the supporting stuff around it. And then the experience is what the people go away with, what they take away, their memories, their experience. And it's quite different to the product. If you need to think about it, put in this sort of thinking that when someone does whatever it is that you deliver, when they go away and they tell people, when they write online even what they did, they don't go, I booked into this room. It was this big and it had these things and it cost me this much. And, they go, oh, it was great. I stayed at this place and, the service was excellent and the people and just, the decor, all those really nice things that they talk about. Or I did this tour and I loved it. And then often people go, oh, okay, so where was that? Oh, so-and-so. And how much did you pay? So then they're getting into the product information and when did it go? So that's your product stuff. So when you think about putting down these 3 elements in your answer, think about those things. So the experience satisfies a need. So it's really what they took away, and their memories. As I said, use tables. I use tables throughout. It really helps me to, and you'll see I've got some examples at the end of each question area. It just helps me sort of, display the information well. Judges can get it quickly, and it also helps me be succinct. Back in the day when we had a 30-page limit pages, we could also use, single line spacing between lines. So they were essential there for space, but nowadays, because we don't have a space issue, we have a word issue, the word sort of limit, that I still keep them in though, because they're great. But keep that in mind too when you are looking. You don't have to worry about how much space you use when you're demonstrating and formatting your information. And tables are great then. Any questions about that one, guys? Feel free to send them through. 1B, 1C is about achieving excellence. And this is an area that the tips are good. They tell you about benchmarks and understanding what best practice is. And really it is about, that sort of thing. And using things like accreditation and awards and any other sort of tools that are out there. I tend to go into, well, what is it, when I talk to a client, what is it that makes the experience excellent? What makes the business excellent? And in reality, usually there's a couple of key areas. So say with my camel guys, we talked about them earlier, Uluru Camel Tours. Our 3 areas of expertise or excellence, and expertise are the camels, the guides, and what's the other one we put in there? I think the interpretation's the other way, the way we talk about it, the experience, because it's quite a unique experience, obviously. But the camels in particular, we talk about how committed the guys are to making sure that they're not just a herd that are essential. They are part of the family and part of the business and a key, player in the experience. And the staff, the levels of training that they get, the levels of experience they have to have just to get a job, the excellent extra things they do out there. So they subsidise their accommodation. They've built on-site accommodation for them so that it's purpose-built, that type of thing. I mean, they're in a location where you have to do things like that. That sort of level of extra service to their staff allows their staff to get on with being excellent, be valued, and do great things. So think about it in that sort of thing. You have to back it up. You have to show how you measure whether they're excellent or not, or whether, whatever areas you say are your thing. So at the start, you sort of say, well, this is my philosophy for excellence, and this is the key areas that deliver on that. And then these are the tools we use, and that's where your accreditation and awards and taking part in external stuff and identifying benchmarks and all that sort of thing. And that's a pretty good answer. We tend to get really good feedback on that one. It was only a new question probably 3-4 years ago, so we've refined that one over the last few years. But yeah, think about what excellence is to you, what it is in the business, and then how do you demonstrate that you achieve it throughout the business. 1D is about your involvement in the tourism industry. Here they're looking for your contribution and your involvement, so that you look at time and expertise, what you took away from it. A lot of it's training, access to markets, that sort of thing when you're involved in the industry. Think about local, regional, state, national, even international, all the things you do at those levels. I use a table here as well and kind of break it down by the first section is local or regional maybe, and then put in it, what we did, what the involvement was, what were the outcomes for both sides maybe, and then next part of the tables, state level maybe, what were the things and who were involved with, and the commitments, what were the outcomes. So we put in things like dollars, time, expertise, things we contributed to. It can be informal stuff too. So if you've got an informal network that you meet with, or even just one or two other operators that you're friends with, you often bounce stuff off each other. As far as the industry and work, you can't help it. It's the industry we're in. Talk about that. There is a group. It's a loose, informal group, but we tend to meet weekly, monthly, whatever. We talk about issues, and in the last 12 months, these are some of the things that I've got some assistance from, or I've provided assistance to my counterparts, through that informal sort of group that we have. So it's pretty straightforward in that respect. I always kind of put in a good case study too of something that happened, often local on the ground where you got involved in something. Or it could be at state or Tourism and Events Queensland are showcasing you or working with you on something in particular, then that's a good case study. Somewhere where you went above and beyond working with the industry to contribute, and you've probably got something out of it as well. And think about even industry-specific stuff. So if you're in adventure tourism, then that side of the industry as well, not just the mainstream tourism. If you're in any other sort of sector of the industry, what were the groups or forums or information that you accessed throughout the industry bodies? What did you attend? And when you do things like that, where you attend things, put in the numbers of people that you met with. So if you were at an ATE, for example, I had 150 appointments. I serviced previous contracts, which might have been a dozen or so. I picked up 2 or 3 new contracts. They're the sort of the real, and to this day, we've seen this many people through that side of the industry, those international wholesalers. And they're your outcomes and their contribution. But then you kind of have to come up with something. So how are you contributing at that level? Oh, I took part in the Queensland area. I attended some of the things that they did. I mean, that's a fair bit of detail about one activity, but you do need to demonstrate that there was benefits from both sides. And that basically they're looking for that you understand that the industry is only as strong as our collective whole, and how we're working together to create business and best practice, and to put our destinations and our state and our country on the map internationally. Okay. Now this example on the page here is one I did for Ayers Rock Resort a few years ago. This is back when we used to lay it out. You'll see there's a lot of copy on those pages. This was for the Indigenous tourism category. It won Nationals 3 times in a row, so it's in the Hall of Fame at the moment, so we're not doing it. We haven't had to do it yet since the portal came up. It is an example of an extreme amount of information sometimes, because they're so good at what they do in the Indigenous space. It's about what they do. They run a resort for Indigenous outcomes. They don't run a resort for financial outcomes. They do need to be financially viable to keep delivering on their Indigenous outcomes, which are training and empowerment and business development, and employment and all those sorts of things. But it's a good example just of, I do miss that we had that wonderful cover page where we could drop a nice big image in, bit of close up, something personal that we are about Indigenous tourism nowadays. The map you can see is quite good. The guest feedback at the bottom of the first page. Actually, that image on the third page we didn't end up using. I must have pulled this from an older version because it was too similar to the one on the front page. And I only noticed it when I put the 3 pages together like this, so then we dropped it out and we actually moved it somewhere else, because it's a slightly different picture, but it's the same people. You'll see lots of dot points down the bottom of that third page too, is just, because it was Indigenous tourism, we talk about the key areas. A lot of copy there. The first bit that's in orange, not the best layout, but it worked okay. It was a bit of feedback from a comment from an Anangu elder and a welcome. So those types of things were put in there. Anangu are the Aboriginal people around Alice Springs at Mutijulu in that area. But that gives you a demonstration of a pretty full-on submission that still did exceptionally well. I would like to get more images in throughout that submission, and I think it's used as an example as we go. But the biggest problem was that we just had so much good information that we didn't want to drop it out, and it kept winning. So, content is king, I guess I take from that as well. We need to make sure we demonstrate good information in our answers. This is one for AAT Kings that I did, and you'll just see here, this is a services table at the top of the first page, and just the type of things that they offer, and then a bit of detail. And then they go into tourism excellence. They talk about their people, their fleet, and the way that they visit their destinations. They're obviously one of the biggest companies in the country at providing access to destinations for coach touring, and that makes them excellent. They're constantly refining it. Obviously, their fleet is their best, latest, greatest. Again, at their size, they can afford to bring in new vehicles pretty regularly. It's all Euro 6, I think, is the latest standard that they buy, so it's best environmental friendly. They have wireless on every coach that's free. They have all these sorts of things, and then we go into the next page about accreditation and awards and stuff like that. And you'll see down the bottom of the last page, you can see this is actually taken from one that was still being developed with a few of the highlights, but the table there of local, regional, that type of thing is a good example of how we use a table there. Righto, question 2. Feel free to give me feedback, guys, if it's going well or if there's stuff that you'd like me to cover. I guess for the guys that are doing festivals and events, the first couple of questions are similar, the first 2, and then it kind of goes into your origin of people, I believe, doesn't it? And it's pretty self-explanatory. I think also economic impact. Again, you just need to be able to demonstrate that you are measuring those things. In the first question, though, too, in the event one, they ask whether or not why the timing was changed. Your timing was chosen, sorry. So you need to demonstrate there that you didn't just put on an event when the place was already busy, and so you're just sort of capitalising on numbers that were there, and that you couldn't drive any additional tourism because at the end of the day there was no beds available. So they're wanting to know why the timing was chosen. In that question as well for events, and for your economic impact, make sure you demonstrate direct spend, so everything in the event's directly spent, but also come up if you can. And I know Tourism Events Queensland have a formula, and use that if you can, or even as I've done for one in the Territory for an event that I work with each year, we just put together what was the average spend for overnight. Actually, we didn't have any day visitors because it's all Uluru. Overnight intrastate, overnight interstate, and overnight international, and then took our figures that we'd gathered for each and used that to come up with a formula, and went, okay, so the event participants at the event contributed this much on their stay during the event. So not that the event contributed that, but while they were there, we were just demonstrating we understood that that was also the wider impact as well as the direct spend. I think that covers off for business. For new businesses, they'll be looking at looking at the philosophy around why the business was established, and what were your plans, and how was your, I guess, that pre-planning to establishing the business, and answering those types of questions and demonstrating there was a plan. And then in the months you have been operating, how did you go against your forecasts and that sort of thing. I think that pretty much covers off those 2 areas. 2A. Now 2A should be pretty similar for most categories. Even the events one, you need a business plan. New business, they ask for I think a Highline business plan or something. But again, feel free to ask me specific questions, guys. In the business plan, it really is just covering off every part of the business and every part, therefore, of this submission, really. And if you don't have a business plan as such, or if what you do have doesn't really suit the needs of what they're asking for here, again, a one-pager, do it, cover off on all the business areas. I worked with a guy a few years back, didn't really have a business plan. He had something, but so we kind of sat down and went, okay. He goes, well, what do we need to cover? And I said, well, what do you cover? And we kind of worked it backwards and forwards, and we ended up with basically then taking the format of the awards and going, okay, well, I've got the areas that I really do well. I didn't realise really that my community involvement was pretty good, but I haven't really business planned for that. But we dropped it in and we talked about that, and the environment was in there as well, which had come up in his business planning and activities, but not to the level that we needed. So we ended up with just a pretty good 1 or 2 pager that was perfect to drop straight into this process. And that's how we've done it, because we were all doing this process. So, we actually put it together specifically to drop straight in. If you have another larger, wider business plan, I mean, they're pretty big things that can have lots of words, lots of stuff, and lots of detail. So you really just need to distill that down and pop it into this area as an answer. And it needs to have, targets, which not everyone sort of sets a hard target, but it needs to have a target for each activity. So we were looking to drive numbers up this many percent. We were looking to keep staff turnover at this much. We were looking to maintain or increase guest satisfaction from 4.5 to 4.6, or if it's a really high rating, then you really are just trying to maintain it, but try and improve it. So all those areas have things that you can have a goal, and then you can measure against it. So at the end of the year, for our customer satisfaction, internally we got this, and then through TripAdvisor we got that, and through Facebook or whatever else we got that. So you can actually show your measurements. If you didn't have your hard targets, then put them in now anyway, and just obviously they'll be close to what you achieved. Again, there's no way of them really determining whether or not you had those targets, and you're not really lying. You're just saying, well, okay, I'll just reverse engineer that a bit, as long as your outcomes are the facts. So yeah, everything needs to be done. Use a table in this space. Make sure that at each table, I tend to do across the top, and you'll see in the example coming up at the end of this slide, the next slide, the business area, and then sort of the strategic actions on the left column. Then the middle column is the actions. So strategic strategies, actions, outcomes. So the three columns underneath one that goes across the top for the business area. So across the business area top one, I usually put in an overarching goal for that area. So if it's driving revenue or business numbers, that sort of thing, then what the overall increase is. But for each of our strategic areas, strategies, we might have a sub sort of measure, because they'll be talking about specifics. And then your actions are what it is, and then the outcomes come in, into your measurables at the end. They're outcomes for the year that you measured. So you've got to measure something for each activity, otherwise you don't know if you achieved it or not. Any questions, feel free to ask, guys. 2B is about innovations. And consider across the business. The good tips there and in the stuff that was sent out that you should have, the extended tips. Think right across the business. I mean, obviously, there's some things that jump out and are very guest related, but you also have to consider everything. So any innovation. So it can be small, but have a good outcome that creates, makes it innovative. And it could be just, you might think, oh, it's not overly innovative, but then you look at the industry or your sector and you go, oh, actually, not many people are doing that. So it is pretty innovative. I'd still put that, we don't put it in as a new innovation for AAT Kings, but the fact that every single coach they have has free Wi-Fi on it, and it's quite good Wi-Fi, it's not sort of dropping out all the time, is fairly innovative. It doesn't happen in most areas. We don't put it in as a new innovation anymore because we've had it now for about 3 or 4 years. But you might find something and you go, well, actually, that's pretty innovative, and what did I do about it this year? How did I implement it this year? So maybe if you rolled out something further, again, like we talked earlier, if you put more solar panels up or more this or more that, what was innovative about it? Put the context in place on, if it's part of a larger story. And then what were the outcomes? You always have to do, this question asks about the outcomes. How did they improve the guest experience? And even if it's something back of house, like maybe a new accounting program, then it might give you better reporting, live figures, that sort of stuff, which is really useful for then delivering the guest experience. Could be that it just frees up time to be more guest focused. So make sure you think about that, and think about the range. Anything you did in human resourcing, marketing, environmental. Yes, you will talk about them later on as well, because if you do something that's guest related, customer service related, then in the customer service question you'll talk about it in detail. But here you'll talk about what made it innovative. And if you can quantify, and I always put in there too, how many man hours were involved in putting it in place, maybe the cost of it. What were the key gist of what it was, and then what was the outcome? So again, you can use a table with 3 columns for the 3 parts of the information, but it helps the judge just read across really well. Demonstrate the innovation all the way through, those the key point there. So even what made it innovative to you and the industry. An example there I'm going to drop in for my guys I work with an adventure park, and they were finding that they were always worried about the top end of the risk management. So people getting quite, dying, getting injured, permanently injured, those sorts of things. And then And they've always been very concentrating on that since they've been doing it for the last 3 years. That was a key thing that they need to nail. But in the last year, they've had enough, to know that they're getting that top end looked after well. But then look at the other day-to-day incidences, and they were finding there's a lot of hand injuries. And they looked into it and thought, well, really just a set of gloves would sort that out. And they hunted around. They just couldn't find a specific set of gloves. They're not really made for sort of outdoor adventure parks. So they went. They had to go overseas to get them manufactured, and they bought them, and they just give them to their guests to use, and they return them at the end. There's no selling them or hiring them or anything like that. But they realised they got rid of 90% of their day-to-day little risk issues or incidences where people might have got a scratch or lost a nail or blisters and cuts and that sort of thing. And they just went, actually, that has improved the experience so well, because before people would go, loved it, but I lost a nail, but this, that, and the other. Their approach is, how do we get rid of the butt? How do we stop people going? And that's why they went, well, no, let's buy these gloves. We had to buy 1,000 of them or something, 3 different sizes. And they have to wash them now, and they have to, keep the upkeep on them and replace them. But they won't. It got rid of the number one but that people were saying. I loved it, but my camel guys did the same things a few years back, where a sunrise experience in the middle of winter. It's very cold, so you get on the camel early, you go out for a ride, and then you watch the sunrise over Uluru. And no matter how many times they told their guests to rug up to bring warm clothes, it's still, it would be a consistent theme of, oh, it was a bit chilly, I was a bit cold. And they also realised at the same time that not everyone on holiday brings a bunch of clothing and anticipates. They're just not up at that hour very often to understand how cold it will be. So they went out and bought, I think, 40 ponchos, woolen ponchos that would go over the top of each guest. You chuck them over your gear, and they're woolen, and they were bright red so that it actually, that's their colours. So it's good branding. And they got rid of that butt. Loved it, but it was a bit cold. You still get 5 stars, and they would have been within their rights to say, oh, we don't need to upgrade. This is up to people to organise themselves. So they went, we just want to get rid of that butt. And then they took it further, that in the cold months when they got back, there was hot towels ready for people, because there's a bit of dust around, that sort of thing. Hot towels ready to freshen up like you do at the end of a plane trip sometimes. And in the summer, there's cold towels that come out of the fridge that they can use just to freshen up. So things like that, they're small things, and you might think, is that innovation? Well, it is, because nobody else is doing that type of level of commitment to their guest, and just constantly coming up with little things that get rid of those butts. Let's just make the guest experience great with no butts at the end. Okay. 2C's about quantifying your training and investment. Investment in training, which can be budget hours and budget dollars, can be also staff costs. I always put 3 figures in, actually, that there was about this much in wages that was contributed, there was this much in hours, and there was about this much in actual budget that was contributed. So and we talk across the business, everybody, and we factor in things like a new staff member, of course, has to do 2 to 4 weeks training on the job. So we factor in there for 2 weeks or whatever, and also the trainer's time. It's legitimate. Everyone's, that happens. People get trained on the job. And we talk throughout this when we get into our table of outcomes of actual training, who did it, what was the outcome. We talk about in-house as much as we do external. You do have to try and explain, if it's being done internal, then some judges will say, well, okay, is that person that's doing the training got training qualifications? They don't always have, but you've usually chosen a staff member or yourself based on your experience and the level. You've done it a lot. You've trained quite a few people. You're a trainer. You might not have the Cert 4 in training and assessment, but you pop that in, that's people are chosen off those sorts of things, so that they know that people that are doing the training have the right background and expertise. Make sure you cover off in your table all the expected things. So obviously workplace health and safety, inductions for all new staff, customer service training. They really like to see something in there about customer service training. And anything specific to your industry has to go in there as well. And even think about if you do have sort of specific needs guests or specific target markets that have training. So if you are targeting the Chinese market, what training was done in that space? Yeah, for specific needs guests, maybe, you know, if you're catering to dietary needs or something like that, any training or, you know, anything that your chefs or your food preparers would have done in that space, and all the expected stuff too. So and if there's RSA involved, and your guest outcome is that for any of those things, you go, well, we did RSA. What's the guest outcome? It is that there was just no incidences. That all guests enjoyed alcohol on offer responsibly and didn't affect. There was no staff or other guest incidences related to alcohol. You know, and that's pretty much, you know. And there was, you know, best practice in that place, and everyone had a really good time. So yeah, think about the guest outcome, because they do ask for that as well. How did it improve guest services and outcome? I always put in an example there. So it could be in the year if you did something innovative in training, which would come up in the question before because it's innovation. But I'd put in here a good example, a case study of why it was identified, how it was instituted and the training was done, and then the outcomes. Or the other side of it is maybe a staff member that's been with you for quite a while and has gone through some really good internal training and external training that you've supported, and you use them as a case study. Everywhere throughout I use case studies and that sort of thing if I can. I guess further back to that innovation question, make sure you put in an image or two in there that shows the innovation you're talking about. And it's something that comes back from judges quite a few times. They get the information and they kind of go, I want to see an example of it, if it's something you can capture in an image. Training and staff and investment, I tend to use a picture of the staff member if we're doing that, or if it was a specific training activity, was there like a new manual produced or something like that, we can drop in. Let me make sure if there's been any questions. They don't seem to be coming through. Okay. Yeah, if there's support from head office, Bianca, you asked a question about, you know, can we include that? Absolutely. It's any training that your staff have received that helps satisfy and, you know, perform their roles and satisfy the outcomes required from their jobs. So it's anything like that. So big companies can talk about large training, which is great, and they're at a little advantage there. But then small companies can do the day-to-day, the understanding of tailoring training, which you can't get from a head office. So don't feel like you need to be, you know, we're at a disadvantage, but there's advantages to both. So you can sort of, you definitely talk about anything that's done at any level for training. As I said, informal, internally, even if there's like today, I guess, is a training activity. You're doing a webinar on best practice in business. It's done from a tourism awards point of view. But also, yeah, if you've done a tutorial online for a new bit of software you're using or a new program or whatever, that's training. So make sure you pop that in there. Good thing to do in here too is also how you just sort of track the outcomes, not just the guest outcome, which is something they ask here, but did the staff learn what they're supposed to learn? How do you know? So you can usually see it in practice, but sometimes if there's a quiz or something at the end, or something they have to satisfy. If you think about formal training, there's usually some sort of, to get a certificate, you have to have satisfied an outcome at the end. So gone through a test or a quiz or demonstrated that you learnt the information. How are you doing that as well through the process? So make sure you pop that in there as well. So 2D, risk management. Here they're looking for how you do your risk management. So you talk about, I guess, in the preamble about if there's any ISO standards that you adhere to, which there usually is, so international standards, reference those. If you use external parties, reference who they are and what they do for you and why you use them. And then I guess how they train and how they do the risk assessments, and then how they train and ensure that they mitigate them against them happening. Talk about some stuff that actually happened during the year. So you kind of mentioned, if you did something new, was there a risk audit done to it? Was it's a new tour or a new activity or new accommodation or new whatever it might be, a new bit of infrastructure. We did that. Maybe even just new training in that space that you might have taken on board for the last year. And then you launch into a table about, which summarises all the risks, what your mitigation strategies were, and also sort of puts in place how you categorize them, and I guess usually there's two ways that they ask for in the tips there: the likelihood of it happening and the impact of it happening, which are two quite separate things. So in some regions, and I'm sure some of you guys would be from an area where the likelihood of of getting hit directly by a cyclone is very low. Others might be in a medium. I don't know if anyone's really in a high. I mean, it might happen every year, but does it hit you every year type thing? But that would be for you to work out. Then what you do to mitigate against it. Even in the southern parts of Queensland, where cyclones are rare, but the impacts of cyclones that come down and flooding and that type of stuff. So it's unlikely to happen, but when it does happen and there's that sort of level of flooding, the impact is serious. So it's, however you do your scale or your rating, it's high and low. You keep a little high, medium, low, or some of mine do it 1 to 5. They have a matrix that they put it through, and if it scores sort of from up, in the 20s down to the zeros, that they've got a matrix that they use. Everyone does it a little bit differently, but it's basically the same outcome. They're basically rating a risk and then mitigating against it. Make sure you put in here as well that you have insurances in place for when those things happen, and there's just nothing you can do and you have to live with it, and you have to come out the other side. Things like communication plans as well are part of your risk management. So when something does happen, how do we deal with it and communicate the appropriate message? And you're talking across the whole business, so it's not just a guest risk, staff risk, infrastructure risk. You're also talking about things like data risk, reputation risks, business environment risks. So if, things like pilot strikes and bird swine flus and just international global downturns. So all those sorts of risks have to come into it as well. For small businesses, put yourself in there. Obviously, key person risks. So if unfortunately you get hit by a bus tomorrow, how does the business go on? Or how does the business satisfy any further bookings? Or what does the business do, I guess? So you have to pop that in. I mean, all businesses have some sort of key person risk management approach, but large businesses, of course, usually can deal with it and mitigate the impacts a lot more. I usually put in a good example too for the year. So AAT King's a good example, and maybe not everyone can do this, but you can do it on your level. They run usually every 12 to 18 months a big accident scenario. They'll often do it in a remote location. And they involve all the emergency services and consider things like the media and all that sort of stuff, and they run a full simulation. They often fly people in from other states where they work, so most of their activities in Victoria, New South Wales, the Territory, and up north in Queensland. But they'll fly in key people to experience it and go through it, and they'll have learnings from that. And because staff turn over a bit, they have to do this every 12 to 18 months, I believe. You might go, oh, crikey, I don't know if I can do anything at that level, but you can run a risk scenario within your business without too much drama and put staff through their paces and have it as a learning experience. It's always a really good one to demonstrate to judges that you're not just having a fire drill, but you've actually thought about worst case scenario, which is why AAT Kings do it in a remote location and they do it with multiple fatalities, and they think about the worst rather than and then plan for the worst and hope for the best and hopefully able to manage it the best way they can. Any questions on risk management, guys? Nothing's come through. Okay, that's the end of question 2. What time have we got? We'll keep pushing along because I know people have got real lives and businesses to get back to. Here's an example, as I said. Again, this is almost 3 pages, so it's a bit over the top for that Indigenous tourism one I wrote a couple of years ago, but that business plan's really good to see that it flows so logically across the page that in that middle page, the top business areas: Indigenous engagement, employment, and Indigenous business development, which is a key focus for those guys, and this is the Indigenous category, so it's key to to have these sorts of areas in there. And then down the side over on the left hand side, You've got your 2 strategy areas. So for them, it's about employment and also about business development. So it's business development first and then employment. It can be either way. They're not put in any order there. But then the 3 or 4, here 5 different areas that we're delivering on this strategic outcome, and then what were the measurables for each of those things. So a judge can read that very easily and understand exactly what we're trying to tell them. And it's a really good business plan. It is what it is. It's over the top. It's almost too much. I think it went on to the next page. But again, they have so much in this space. They operate a full resort with multiple resort offerings, as well as have this large Indigenous commitment. So we kind of had to demonstrate both. And over here on the first page, we've got a key vision, and then the key values, or I guess strategic areas, overarching strategic areas that are worked on and delivered on in the year. And then these were the key areas that were actually under other business areas. You box and dice it a different way here and there, but we always got excellent feedback for that one. All of these in the last column, that's usually much narrower, that last column, but because these guys had so many measurables, they get the resort itself doesn't get any money from the government for Indigenous employment, but the academy that they operate, Indigenous Tourism Academy that they operate, is government funded. It's like a TAFE and any other space type thing. And so they have a lot of measurables that they have to report on for that academy, but then they report also on the ongoing outcome of employment and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people going into jobs elsewhere and going into senior management jobs within the company, those sorts of things, but also the businesses they're fostered. So they have quite a few experiences on the resort site that are delivered by Indigenous businesses. So whether it's performance type stuff or storytelling or arts or that sort of thing, bush tucker. So they have a lot of reportables. But usually, as I say, that last column's a bit narrower because usually reportables aren't that big. Here's another one for AAT Kings. We're looking there at, I guess, some of the, again, it's one that was in development, so there's a few highlights and underlines and stuff. You'll see that this is the what do you call it, innovation sort of table on the top of the first one. Then we go into training, the training program, the guest benefits, and who was participating. And then we go over into risk management, and you'll see there. I mean, sometimes I use colours, sometimes I don't. This one I didn't, but you can see in the last 2 columns on that third page is where we do our ratings. They do a 1 to 5, and our table then sort of covers. We've broken them into business areas. So there's operational, and then there's financial, business, environment risks, and then there'll be I think the third one's probably reputational or something like that type sort of thing. But break them into those areas so the judges get that you understand there's different areas of risks. Any questions, guys, feel free to send them through. Question 3, marketing. Now, this is one that people struggle with a little bit. As I said it before, I mentioned that it's because people tend to understand their guests but don't tend to be able to do it in, I guess, a more to write down exactly in an academic sense, which marketing, the background to marketing is always a little bit academic. The doing's obviously much more creative and a lot more, I guess, intuitive. But 3A asks you for who are your target markets. So you really need to clearly define them here. And what they want to understand here is that when we get to the question about understanding your points of difference or understanding your activity, your marketing activities, that it's based on a good understanding of who you're marketing to and that you've defined them well so you know the avenues and the messaging and the understanding their needs and wants, which, and where they're coming from, all those things. So that will then come through when you're doing your marketing, why you're doing your marketing, because that's, you want to talk to these target markets. Make sure you're talking here about geographic, which is just where they're from, demographic, which is the old way of sort of stating, age groups and time of life type thing, or family cycles or education levels, wealth levels, those sorts of things are all the old demographics. And then psychographics, which is the needs and wants, and we kind of touched on those earlier with the experiences when we were talking question 1B. So here you really need to define what are their needs and wants for each category. Now, my guys, actually, Ayers Rock Resort, when they do this, and I think it's in the example coming up, they still use some of the old sort of labels for their target markets, empty nesters and grey nomads. We never get bad feedback because when we define them and we put the detail behind them, they are really just labels that make sense once you get the detail. They're the only clients I know still that use those old tags. But they're happy to because they don't get caught up in a label as long as the information that we can demonstrate afterwards comes through strongly, that we do get the geographic, the demographic and the psychographic information for each of those. So the label, don't get caught too much in the label. Like, it does have to make sense. It doesn't have to be too, don't fly in the face of accepted thinking. But it just, it'll be supported by the information that you provide. Also, the purchasing behavior comes in here. So if you can do that for each target market, great. If not, definitely do it just for as a whole, that you know that when people are researching your experience, how they're finding out the information. You can mention stuff there that they are, if they're obviously going to your website, or they're reading articles online, or they're using TripAdvisor, if you can capture that sort of information, and then they purchase direct on the phone, or they purchase through a wholesaler, or they purchase online direct, or they purchase through an online wholesaler, or travel agent. Those sorts of things you need to demonstrate. Again, it'll come through in your marketing activity. That, if you know this stuff, then your marketing activity should match up quite nicely. Okay, I think there's a question or two there. So Karen, do you recommend using Tourism Australia's labels? No, I don't actually. I'd recommend against it. It's a good question actually. Tourism Australia's labels have been done for the whole state, and they're often quite aspirational as target markets. It's who we'd like to target. Back in the day when they had the experience seeker, I don't know who they have anymore, I must admit, because I don't read it. But that said, I do in the next question often reference what the state's doing to show that we're aware, or what the nation's doing. But in this one, we do our own target markets, because we, as business operators, should know our guests much more than any Tourism Australia can tell us, any TEQ can tell us, or any RTA, your local regional guys. You can take elements. I often use what they do in psychographic information to find out what the latest is happening, and take elements from that and use that as my psychographic information, but refine it again for the client, or for the guest that is for that client. But I tend to steer clear of their labels. Judges will read that and go, you think here what we're asking is that you're taking part, or you understand what Tourism Australia or Tourism Events Queensland are doing. They don't particularly need to know that at all now. They just need to know your target markets better than anyone else, and you will. As I said, in 3B, we might as well go to that one. When it says to you, what research are you using to demonstrate that your products meet the guests' needs and wants of your target markets, then I do say here, that the research I'm using, is internal research, and we go on to that. We also look at the external research, see where it applies, see where it doesn't. So with a company like AAT Kings, again, as an example, people that are on a bus tour are quite a different subset to what Tourism Australia would say our internationals are. Tourism Australia is always talking about the intrepid traveller, the experienced seeker, people who are looking to get under the skin and really get to, I guess, that smaller group tailored experience. That doesn't really sit well with an AAT Kings product, obviously. So why, so how is that? But then you look at it and go, well, AAT Kings probably take over 1 million guests a year, internationals maybe a year across the country, probably more actually. So, who's right, AAT Kings or Tourism Australia? Tourism Australia is talking about the highest yield, aspirational type guest. AAT Kings are targeting a really good part of the market that, that are looking for an experience, and they can deliver it. They're both right in their two different ways. And you can't tell me a company as large as AAT Kings, is doing it wrong. They know when they're doing it wrong. They work out usually well before anyone else, and they usually rectify it and do it well. So I wouldn't use Tourism Australia stuff to say these are my target markets. I would certainly reference it though. So we actually do that for AAT Kings, and we say actually we're looking at their customers are experienced seekers, or whatever the latest word is, and I'll go in and check that out when we do it. But for the territory in particular, we use the wording out there, but they're not quite as intrepid. they're obviously not like looking for the intimate experience, but if they are, then AAT Kings offer a small group travel out in the territory in particular, where you can do most of the experiences in a smaller group, of usually sub 15, or you can do it in the large group on the 40-seater coach. But they're looking for similar stuff. It's just in a bit more of a, I guess, controlled and organised environment. So we do that where we reference it, but we say, no, well, this is our guest. But we have taken from the research. We use our internal stuff more there. But also then to answer this question, they're looking, so you're not just looking at that quantitative and qualitative stuff, qualitative stuff and that sort of research, but quantitative. So they're saying, so okay, how do you know your product's meeting the guests' needs and wants? Well, you're obviously surveying them and checking out their satisfaction, and that's the final type way of understanding whether or not your products are meeting them. So you do it for each target market here. So you take those target markets from 3A and you answer this question in relation to each of those target markets. And you talk about guest satisfaction for each of those target markets if you can. Sometimes we don't have a figure for specifics, each target market, but if solid repeat visitation, you may not even have to for each target market. But if you can put in something that shows that you know the target market's growing, so if it is international focused, then you usually are tracking that number. If it is interstate, then you're usually tracking that number. So that's your figure that you're tracking, and your satisfaction level. If you can go into your way you do your surveying and try and pull out satisfaction levels for each, good and well. If not, then an overall satisfaction level is good enough too, especially if it's for each product. Maybe if you sell multiple products or experiences, then it does show that you are keeping an eye on guest satisfaction with each. So for A and B, I usually use a couple of graphs, that sort of thing. So in A, obviously, I use some target market graphs. So I'll use maybe geographic for each target market or one for the whole. In B, I'll use a graph showing, I guess, growth in numbers and growth in satisfaction across products or across target markets, depending on which way I can, but always got to address the target markets there. For 3C, I don't use any graphs as such, but I do use a bit of a table because we're talking here about what sets you apart, your unique selling points. And to do that, you do need to do a little bit of a competitor analysis. Now, don't get caught in this space of trying to make yourself look good at your competitors' expense. That's not what the question's about. It's really just about understanding that you exist in a competitive landscape, and why would people choose you over someone that does the same thing, or someone that does something maybe different, but you're competing for time in an itinerary maybe, or for dollar spent. Again, do this by target market. So I would break it down and go, actually, well, for each target market that I've defined in 3A, these are my competitive points of difference, my unique selling points. And explain them, and then show and talk about these, and then show examples of how you demonstrate demonstrate examples of how you use the messaging, or how you use imagery, or how these unique selling points are actually marketed. They want examples at the end, so they want to see that for each target market if you can. Again, a collage would work quite well here, so you're not using up a lot of imagery, but make sure you put some examples in there looking for them. It's in the tips. And it's not too hard to do. But for your competitor analysis, I tend to do a little table that sort of puts along one axis is my business, and then the key competitors that have been identified, and on the other axis is the things that we all deliver, or the things that we deliver in that space, and what sets my business apart from the others. And it's really a bit of a checkbox thing. It's a good way to demonstrate, I guess, a lot of business areas, and to show your point of difference in a short space on a table, if you know what I mean. If you're not sure, then there's certainly lots of stuff on the web about competitor analysis, and using maybe a competitor analysis chart, so they're easy to find out there. Okay, 3C, 3D. Now, this question's about innovative marketing, so they want to know what you did in this year, and that word innovative comes into it again. Sometimes though your basic stuff works really well. So I do say to people here as a bit of a caveat, if your brochure strategy is working, and you think, gosh, I don't have a brochure strategy, I've got a brochure. You do have a strategy. You think about it, you print them, and then it's how they're displayed and where they're displayed and how they're supported. So if they're on reception desks and there's 30 others, how does yours stand out? How does yours get picked up? Why does yours keep working? What makes it? Because in that space, it's innovative if it keeps working against others. And it comes down to often how it's designed, where it's displayed, and the human support behind it. So the reception staff that are familiar and trained up on what you do and all those sorts of things. So you can talk about the basics of brochures and that sort of thing. But you do need to show why what you're doing is best practice and innovative against producing a brochure and sticking it out there and hoping it works and then wondering why it doesn't. So you can include those things. But what they do want to see, and they definitely want to understand, is do you understand the opportunity of the digital space? In particular, we're looking at search engine optimization, which is a pretty basic thing nowadays, which is the thing you do with your keywords and phrases and that sort of stuff, and it doesn't cost you anything. And search engine marketing, you have to mention it even if you don't do it, that it's something that you don't have to mention it, but I'd say, well, it's something that at this point is being monitored, but you don't do it if you don't. Search engine marketing is those ones where someone does a search and then the paid ad comes up at first and second and third quite often at the top of the page. That's search engine marketing. It's what you pay for. It can be really, it's extremely sort of targeted type marketing. It's obviously based on, you put in your key terms of search references, that sort of thing. And it's very manageable because you can say, well, I only want to spend $10 this week, and each click costs you so much to go through. And once you've spent your $10 budget for the week, then the ad disappears. It's not up there, and so you can go, well, if it's working, I'll pay for how long's a piece of string, basically. One thing you do have to take into account, though, is if you're coming up really well in your search engine optimization, so you're the first or the second listing, that if they click on your ad above or they click on your listing, the ad costs you, the listing doesn't. So sometimes you are taking, you're paying for a customer that might have just clicked through anyway. So you do have to balance that up. And hence why you might say because our search engine optimization is working really well, we don't take part in any search engine marketing at this point, but it's monitored. You'll also then actually have to talk about social media in the digital space, what you're doing there, whether it's organic or paid for, and with boosted posts and all that sort of thing. I mean, Facebook nowadays is obviously the main one. There are others out there. Don't get too caught up in Twitter unless you have a great following. Twitter's usually for high-profile businesses or high-profile personalities. I mean, the way to use Twitter is to have those social media influencers come and visit and do tags and write things and put images and videos up. So you do have to talk about that space as well, where you have vloggers and bloggers and social media influencers coming through, which should be delivered to you by Tourism Events Queensland and regional tourism organisation, but you can do it yourself nowadays. It's so easy to target these people. And also consider things like promotions and stunts. So if you are running competitions, what about it was innovative in what you did with the information, the data you gathered, that sort of thing, and stunts are always good, a bit of fun. If Tourism Events Queensland's were doing something somewhere, what part you took in that stunt. I know my camel guys a couple of years ago had camels in Martin Place in Sydney. Obviously, it was a Tourism NT initiative. It wasn't their camels, of course. They weren't going to pack them up and send them thousands of kilometres. They just got in touch with the local camel operator and got a couple down there and branded them up. A camel's a camel. But it was a stunt type thing that they did. From a big company point of view, AAT Kings a couple of years back equipped one of their coaches so to strip it out and put a bowling green inside, and in partnership with Hello World travelled around the country to all regional centres at very low cost, and Hello World helped cover a lot of the costs. Did exhibitions and stage sort of activity in each of these places where there was a Hello World outlet, and for that age group that still like to use a travel agent, it worked exceptionally well. And yeah, their bookings through Hello World were like up 200% or 300% or something crazy. So it was very targeted to that older age demographic domestic market. We can't all do something big and fabulous like that, but we can always do something that's a bit fun, especially online. Maybe maybe a bit of an April Fool's stunt, or again, my camel guys, the girls got out for Breast Cancer Awareness Week and looked like they were topless with their hats held over their chests. Things like that, just as a bit of a splash. And being outback and cheeky, it was a bit of fun, and there was nothing rude about it. So think about stuff like that, where you might just do a little online stunt or something as well. And then, how did it work? Who clicked through? Who made comments? What did it work? I mean, you can't always have a sales outcome for some of those things, but you usually can. There's lots of measurables with online, and you can usually tell if it's cutting through. And then you can always say, well, we know a Breast Cancer Awareness Week stunt. We don't know exactly how many sales we got, but given the timing, and we can look at the demographics of who saw that, the reach. That market's responded quite well, so we know it's contributed to that. So in that target market, we've seen increases. Make sure, all this marketing in 3D is done by target market as well. So again, we're using 3A, the target markets we've defined, and then we've used them throughout the questions in 3. It's essential that once you know those target markets, it'll actually help you answer the rest of them. And also then for 3D, put in a couple of examples. Again, a collage of screenshots of your website, a couple of these innovative online, Facebook posts, maybe some vlogger stuff or something. And collage them up and drop in one, because at the end of the day, they won't want to see the specifics. They want to get enough detail out of it, so don't put 12 things in a collage, but certainly I'd look at about 3. And as I said, they go across the page quite nicely. So you'll notice as you're doing your submissions, which I do them all in Word, and you copy and paste them over. As I said, it's not restricted by the width of an A4 page. So you do have that space when the judge will open it up and read across, that your images can be quite landscaped when you're thinking about that. Okay. Any questions about marketing, guys? Feel free to send them through. We're getting there. It's coming up to 12. There's just some examples, not great ones to be honest, but I put them in because this is an earlier version of I think an AIRSRock one that we did. But you can see the tables that I've used here on the left hand, the first page, and the left hand column is those grey nomads, empty nesters, that type of thing. Then some attributes, and then the psychographic information. So that's sort of a really good table. It's showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 target markets. It does say in the tips to try and limit it a bit, but with a big company like that and a key destination, they have at least 6. And we're talking business events type people and international tour series type people, which is, companies that sell these international tour series that come out. So you know exactly when they're coming, you know exactly how many numbers they've got. Whereas the rest of them are more the VFR, it's more the leisure tourism markets, the independent travelers and VFR and grey nomads and all that sort of thing, families. And those graphs aren't wonderful, but they do the job. Those pie graphs, I've got better since then at using, and I think Word's got a lot better. It doesn't hurt if you think you're going to get at state level. They don't get too caught up in judging your elements like graphs and stuff, pie graphs and charts and whatever. But at nationals, they do. They're a bit picky. And I guess you're up against the best of the best. So this year we will make sure that everything we put in is at the highest level. So we'll probably use a graphic designer to do a couple of infographic type things. We won't spend a lot of money, mind you. And one of my clients actually gets an overseas company to do it out of, I think the last time he used someone from Croatia, and it cost him to do a video, I think $200. So I know it's not in the best interest of supporting local suppliers, but for that business, he just said, well, I get a video made every 2 to 3 weeks. So we do all the shooting, the footage here, but we put a brief together and we send it over, and this guy puts it together and lays it out really nicely and does it wonderfully well. And for $200, I get a really great packaged product at the end. He said, in Australia, that would cost me $1,000, and I just couldn't afford to do it every 2 weeks. So think about things like that if you can access that sort of support. But yeah, make sure you do demonstrate as best you can that you're, there's, I guess, professionalism in any of your elements that you're dropping in. There's some examples for AAT Kings. We looked at the average per night increases in that graph in the first page as a demonstration that the product was meeting the needs, and then we went into satisfaction ratings, which we probably could have done in a chart as well, and I will this year, so we'll have two charts and collate them up. In that middle page for AAT Kings, you'll see that black and red table with on the axes. That's their points of difference, and that's actually come straight off their website. They actually have a why choose us because they're in a pretty competitive space, and Grey Line's a big competitor and a bunch of others. We actually, I'd probably put in there again, now that we don't have a space problem, but it's a word, we'll put in a competitor analysis with a chart this year. We've always struggled up until last year with space for these guys. Oops, let's go back one. And then you'll see a couple of examples down the bottom, and over in this third page is their activity. And these are the target markets down the left-hand side. Middle activities, they're innovative marketing, and then the last column is the outcomes. Some things are for all markets too, and it's okay to pop something in like that. But even if you do have a website and you go, well, my website talks to all my target markets, you pull out the parts of the website that talk specifically to each. So if one of your target markets is internationals, then obviously there might be some specific detail about your language options, or there might be tourist information that's really focused on the internationals. They're looking for this type of thing. So you've got a page for that. Or if the education market is a key target market, then you would have on them your school groups goes to this page, and it's all about stuff for them. So think about it that way. So your website can talk to multiple target markets. Okay, we've got a question. Couple of questions. Graphs and infographics are part of your image count. Yes, absolutely. Reference your sample pages. Yeah. How many images have you used? I see 3 pie charts. Plus the logo. Yeah, that was back in the day. What you're looking at is before we had the image count. We just had a word count. So they would all count. I'd put the 2 pie charts that you see next to each other collated into one image. I would put down the bottom of page 2 of the AAT Kings one down the bottom. I would collate the examples. The logos that are in there, though, are on the top of each page. You don't have to worry about those because we're not laying out pages anymore. So those logos that are put in for AAT Kings, they were just part of our page layout. They're not included anymore. We don't actually. It's funny, but there's no need to pop in a logo of your own company, which is weird, isn't it? You'd think that, well, it's something I want to do, but it should come through in your marketing collateral that you'll use as examples, which would be in the after the AAT Kings example there. You would see that there's I'd have examples in the next page. There's no videos, unfortunately, so you can't put any video in at this point. I expect and anticipate this will change in the next couple of years, because now they've got the portal and it's starting to work well. It's much better this year than last year. Then the logical thing is to allow everyone to put up at least one image. One video. And they will limit it by saying, well, it has to be this size and can only go for this many minutes, because the judge's probably only going to sit there and watch a 3 to 5 minute video or something. But at this point, no videos. So there's just no need to worry about them. Don't put links in. They won't click on a link. They'll go to your website though, as a punter would when they're doing the site visit. So that's when your video is of value for your site visit. A judge may though, now that they're doing it from home in their own time, they might get a bit excited about reading something and go to your website while they're reading it. We didn't tend to do too much of this when we sat next to each other because we were too busy judging, and we were trying to keep up with each other and do a really good job that way, and didn't kind of have that left your own devices to click on the web and go and have a search for something. So they may well, while they're reading your submission, go, I want to have a look at the website. As long as they're doing that for all of them in a category, I think that it's fine. It's no big deal, but they'll be doing it like a punter. So on your website nowadays, most people will have, if you've got a very experiential type thing, then yeah, you have a video, and that's where they'll pick that up. But you can't link any submissions. Any videos in your submission. As far as graphic design, the whole point of the portal was to cut a lot of that out. So they're trying to, I guess, allow a judge to read information from for a category from all the entrants, and it's all kind of assessed on a level playing field. In one of my face-to-face workshops, someone said, they'd worked out how they could do text wrapping and do all these things and basically go back to the future on laying out the submission in the portal in the boxes. And I kind of went, well, isn't that kind of counterproductive to why we have the portal? We might as well go back. If you do have any questions about that, and I will follow up with Katie, and maybe she can send something out to all nominees, but I'm pretty confident that all they want to see is everything that's laid out when you lay it out within the restrictions of the portal just is laid out well. So your tables make sense, and things are easy to see and read, but there is no graphic design elements apart from dropping in elements as mentioned in the question. You basically, and that's why I would do any infographics kind of across the page, so they're taking up what it looks like when the judge opens it, runs across the page underneath the text. There's not big white spaces sitting next to it that does, kind of looks a bit odd. So think about that layout, but I wouldn't get too caught up in worrying about the layout because they're trying to reduce that. The word limit is 12,500 words. It's in when you go through your there's rules and for entry. Go through all that off the website. Go through all your criteria as well for each. But the rules have come down now. They used to have so many when we used to lay them out in a page format in PDF, that sort of thing. But nowadays, because you're dropping in a portal, it's set. So you have 12,500 words, and you have 25 images, and that covers all infographics and your charts tables aren't included. Tables they drop in, you copy them straight across from Word in, and they should drop in as is. I've had very little problem with glitches this time. Last year there was heaps of formatting problems. This year I've noticed two things. One, dot points sometimes don't come across as nice dot points, so you need to check all your dot points. Two, on a couple of tables that I've copied across when I've been playing with it, if I've used, as you can see on the page now, say that black section or that maroon section in that table, if I've used that with white text, sometimes the background color doesn't come across, so they just look like empty columns and empty rows, but the text is in there, but it's white on white. So I'm actually, for this year when I'm doing it, not going to use any white text in case I miss something and it doesn't go across. So yeah, white on color text sometimes doesn't seem to go over. All the other colored stuff did though, so colored text, all the colouring, and anything else I use just tend to be in the table as a background colour. As I said though, collate your images where you can, but don't lose the point of the image. So if you're putting 3 and 4 and 5 together, it's too much. A judge isn't going to blow it up. So I use hero images where I can, and when there's a couple maybe before and after, or images like that show, that don't, they're just an example rather than detail, then I might collate a couple and they go up as one image file. So then it's a tricky way to get more images in, but you are losing the size of them, of course, when you're putting them together. But graphs certainly work well together. Yeah, we'll get to the portal for sure, guys, at the end. once we get through all these questions, I will open up the portal and you guys can watch me drop in a few things and see how it works. And we'll see if any of the glitches have been fixed for those 2 glitches that I've outlined, but we'll definitely get to the portal. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Customer service is usually done quite well, mainly because most businesses in tourism are doing it well. Sometimes though people do struggle to put it down on paper why they do it well, and that's where hopefully you'll pick up a few tips today. The first question asks you to cover your customer service philosophy. So what does customer service mean to you, and what does it mean in your business? You should be able to like have a vision for customer service or a statement. And the values are the sorts of things that back that up. The types of people and the types of attitudes and activities and the types of attributes that your people have that should demonstrate customer best practice in customer service. So quite often people will state they do customer service well and get into a bit of detail, but then kind of lose their way because they haven't got it written down. Make sure you do have something that sort of shows what are the key elements. And it can be things like obviously being open and understanding, listening and never being defensive and being timely in your customer interactions and, never bringing, your bad day at home to work and all those sorts of general things. But you do need to be able to sort of capture them in a statement of what are the elements of customer service, and then show how you train your staff and bring them up to your way of doing customer service. Obviously, you're usually employing people that have good customer service background. Not always, but in a lot of cases. They're the types of people we try to employ in the tourism industry. And then you sort of say, well, then we refine that to our level of customer service through our induction process and on-the-job training by experienced and trained, the expertise that exists within the business, and maybe some external training now and then too in customer service. And then how do you measure it? So how are you monitoring it day to day? How are your staff buying into it? How are the really good staff assisting those staff that are still getting up to speed? And then, you do touch on your measures, your internal and external measures. There is another question later where you go right into that detail, but you touch on it here. So 4B then goes into specific needs, not just disabilities though. We're talking about everything here for a specific need. Think about your target markets that you outlined earlier. So internationals have specific needs, elderly might have specific needs, families have specific needs. Then you do obviously have your disability access, your accessibility, vision impaired, hearing impaired, those sorts of things as well. And it might be, and I always pop in there now, mental health. And yes, of course, you can't prepare wonderfully well for people with mental health, and you can't always identify them. But your staff need to know, and yourself need to know that it's out there, that it's a big part of our industry and our big part of our society, and that our industry is aware. And really, it's more of an openness and an understanding, and that your staff are equipped to maybe deal with something if it does arise. But yeah, no complications there. Don't go into, we all need to have mental health training and all that sort of thing, but we just need to be aware that these things exist. Other areas that need to be, if you're providing food and catering, then that you have sufficient coverage for dietary needs and maybe religious needs in that space. So think of a broad range, even if it's something that you haven't done a lot or you may have never done, but you can deal with a specific need, drop it in. Always put in a good example there again too, though, about what it is, at the end of the year, showing this is something that happened in the last 12 months and this is how we dealt with it and this was the outcome and it was great. Same for customer service, the one before. Pop in a couple of bits of feedback from guests just to demonstrate. Certainly saying things that, love the customer service from the staff. They were excellent. They couldn't, nothing was too much trouble. That type of wording's always great. 4C is about customer satisfaction and identifying improvements. So it's 2 parts. Make sure you answer both. Measuring customer satisfaction is, you would have touched on it in 4A because it's part of your understanding your philosophy as being accountable and measurable. And then here you go into the detail of how you measure it. And I've already talked about, external stuff like TripAdvisor, and delving into the information is always really good. This is where we put quite a bit of detail about how we delve into the information that we gather internally and externally. You do have to have internal measures, even if you don't have something strong. Put in place at the moment and measure it for the next few weeks, the next few months. It is okay not to have a high level of surveying all the time. Some people worry that they might over-survey their guests or worry them. Guests are happy to do a certain amount nowadays because part of our society we get asked to fill in a survey so often. But a bit like, I guess, the tax office is quite happy if you put up a car and they say, well, we just need to see a logbook for 3 months of the year and we'll take that as the 12 months. Same if you think, well, actually, I can only ask so many questions and I don't want to overdo it. But at times, I do. If I get a customer that's chatty, that's keen to give us information, I've got an extra set of questions that I can get them to fill out, or I can capture and fill out on their behalf while they're talking to me. That's a valid way of doing it too, of finding extra detail. It doesn't have to be every client. It doesn't have to be every guest. Your sample size doesn't have to be everybody. I know some of my big guys, they're looking at if you can get anywhere from 15 to 30% feedback. 30% is really high for big customers. So, Ayers Rock Resort, I think they usually try aim at about 15 to 20. And I think, obviously your TripAdvisor stuff is those that go on TripAdvisor. You can encourage that by including it in follow-up links or handing out cards or doing whatever it might be. But yeah, as long as your sample size is a reasonable size, then you can use those feedback with confidence. Always put in a good example of something that the feedback then, because then they go, how do you identify improvements? We do that and we go through, we have a look through our qualitative stuff. We also look for themes and ongoing stuff. Here's a couple of examples from the year, and here's what we did. Make sure you have those examples and a good picture if you can that shows it in action if you can. Or a bit of feedback came from guests, you copy that, drop it in, and then that can be your lead into them. Then we did this, and this was the outcome. Nearly done with 4, guys, and then I'll get to the questions again. 4D is about customer complaints specifically. So these 4 A, B, C, D are all related and should tell a really good customer service story for you. Excuse me. Customer complaints. They want to know you have a process here and that you understand what are the methods that customers complain through. So whether it's face-to-face, at the time, afterwards, on third-party websites, or through a distribution partner, so a wholesaler or the local visitors centre, or you need to kind of capture all those, put down these are the ways that complaints can come to us. This is how we monitor them. This is the way we regularly monitor them. And then as something comes in, this is our process. So it's dealt with at the time, if it can, especially face to face, and our staff are empowered to do this much. If it's something beyond that level and out of the box and needs to be escalated, this is how it's escalated and to who it's escalated. This is when it's followed up. This is when it's resolved. So do that for all of them. So whether it be online, whether it be face-to-face, whether it be direct to you after the account, make sure you have all those elements of your customer complaint process. And that's then when they read that, a set of judges will read it and go, that's great. You are accountable. You embrace customer feedback. And you know that sometimes you're not going to get it right, or sometimes you're going to get one of those customers, which we've all got, which may have never should have been your customer to begin with, or is complains about everything. That somehow you're embracing that and getting out of it what you can in a constructive way. Put in an example of something that happened in the year. Make sure it does. It's a really good example, and it shows your customer complaint process in the best light. But yeah, I think it's all pretty straightforward. Number 4. We're nearly at the end, guys. Here's another question about the portal. Once you've put it into the portal, can you edit it? Absolutely. You can actually do your whole submission writing in the portal. I wouldn't suggest it, but you can. Once you've submitted it, then it's locked away. So just be mindful not to submit it until you're very much done. But there's save in there. You push save all the time. I've noticed when I've been playing in it, though, even when I don't push save, it's saved every single time. I've never lost anything. But that said, it hasn't been on a day when, maybe 200 other people are using the portal as well. So I always push save as best you can, but I've tested it and it hasn't lost anything. But you can edit everything in the portal. There's no dramas at all. But I tend to do all my submissions in Word and then copy and paste. Remember too, when you're doing your submission, if you are doing it in Word, that you'll have your questions in there. They're obviously counted as words in your Word doc, but they won't be in the portal because they're set in there and they're not part of your fields that you're dropping into. So there's a couple of hundred words, I believe, in the questions alone. So you have those up your sleeve when you're doing your word count in Word. Okay, last question area, guys, which is the environment and your community involvement. We'll push through this one and then we'll get the portal up and I'll show you a few things. Now, as I said earlier on, though, don't leave this one to last every time. It's 3 questions. They're out of the 20 marks like the others. Some of them have 4 and 5 in the others, and they're worth less. These are all worth at least 6 or 7. So consider them and don't do them last and run out of puff. 5A is about your local regional impacts, how you support the local economy, basically. So what you want to do here is quantify and demonstrate every dollar that's spent locally through purchasing and a local. You want to talk about having a buying local. I always put in buy a local, regional, state type first policy, and then we go beyond that if we need to, because it's not always available to buy all items. Some things aren't even made in Australia, so that's understandable. But what they want to see here is that you do have that policy in place and that you look local first if there's a chance you can find it local. And to do that, you demonstrate by, I always put in a table of about the top 10 actual providers, suppliers that I've got, what we purchased from them and how much we spent. And then probably the last line, the 11th sort of row in the table is a bit of a catch-all for the rest and a total figure. And then underneath that is your full total. So that's how much we directly spent in a local or regional context. I always put regional. I think local's too limiting, and you just need to define and go, well, local/regional for us is that we try and buy within our suburb or our locality or our city, but it's not always available. So then we might look outside that local government area or whatever it might be. So for Queensland, say it's Brisbane's local, Southeast Queensland's regional. We try and source everything we can in that space. And then we look at wider Queensland before we then maybe head into state and international. I put in all our wages as well and pop that down. So we employ this many people locally. I mean, everyone you employ usually is local unless you've got a couple of remote staff, but you put in all your local staff, how much your total wages bill was, and then you put down, we know that majority of that stays in the local economy. And then also, I guess I've got on the slide there a multiplier. They're not really used so much anymore, but I do, as I mentioned earlier, I did mention earlier that there's lots of figures out there that are put together usually by TEQ. So there'll be a regional tourism snapshot that's done for each region, and they'll say in there how much a day tripper spends, how much an overnight domestic spends, how much an overnight international spends in your region. And if you have those figures, which you should, and you would have demonstrated them through your business plan and marketing activity, then you can even extrapolate exactly, off those given figures, how much your guests contributed to the region. I often pop that in. I mean, it's again, it's wider impact, but it shows that you get that your guests are part of a bigger picture, and it also helps you put quite a bit of good information in here to get your 6 marks. I think it's 6 for that one. I think the next one's 6 or 7 anyway. 5B, define your local community. Here, it's about, how do you contribute to your local community? I always define, what is local community, what the values are. The question used to be, how do you support and respect, I think, your local community values? It was a funny question that caught a few people out, but I always liked it because it made me define them. So, it's good to do that still in a way. Use a paragraph or two going, well, people live in this region and, for these reasons, and that's the reason people often visit to, and the way of life is this, that, and the other, and these are the values. And it's often on the council sort of websites, often done this sort of work. It's what makes living and visiting your region important, and then you go into what you do to support that. So by supporting local schools, supporting local charities, supporting local events, doing stuff with the Indigenous people, that goes in here as well. Even if it is a case of, well, I just saw some information from the local Aboriginal, might be a health service or something, because there's not always a tourism or a business service, but they had some basic information about the local original Indigenous inhabitants, and I put that on my website. I put some, I've got that information here for anyone that's interested. It's just that respect. People often say to me, because I work in the Indigenous space a lot, they'll go, well, so in New Zealand, there's just so much Maori culture and it's integrated so well. Why don't we do that in Australia? And I go, well, it's really quite simple. A lot of people we just don't take the effort to kind of go, okay, I want to recognize that by just popping it on the website. It might seem a bit tokenistic, but that's where we've got to start sometimes. I understand the meaning behind the name of our town, which is Aboriginal, or the meaning of this or that. Just that basic level is where we start to integrate that. And it also increases the level of interaction and engagement in our communities. With our Indigenous people, and also it helps us with, our guests get that level of interpretation, which is great. Make sure you put in everything that you do in your local community, even if it's staff that you support to do things outside of hours. So you let them leave work early, or you give them a day off to take part in things. You have flexible work arrangements. And it could be simple as to attend P&C meetings or this, that, and the other. But that's your business, understanding that your guests are part of your staff are part of a wider community, and that's important that you allow them to contribute to that community. As long as you do something to support them, you have flexible working arrangements, or you give them time off, then take some credit for that. Especially if you yourself are involved in a lot of things and you're a business owner operator, then you definitely put that down, because that's something that you as the owner operator do outside the business, but you support the community. So all that goes into there as well. 5C, the last question. Environmental impacts. This is pretty straightforward, though I guess the benchmarks have been, increasing over time now for a while. As we all know, it's not good enough just to recycle paper or recycle stuff through the council if they do that. It's good to put that in here as well and measure it and understand, and maybe then demonstrate it, recycled versus landfill. But it's also understanding, having a look at your electricity bill and understanding where you can make savings, understanding should you buy green energy or not, and being able to demonstrate how much you used over the year. Some of these things will go up in good years, of course, and that's just due to business activity. A good way then to display that is that per guest, it shouldn't have gone up, and it will probably have gone down. So we often do that with some of my guys that have had really good years or continue to keep growing, and they're going, well, every year this is going up, our usage of water or our usage of electricity, gas, that sort of stuff, or fuel, because the buses are running more often. I go, that's fine, let's put it down as a per guest usage, and then we can show, well, it's coming down. In most cases it is, if not all. And the other side though is, okay, so what, we do put in the basics, like, we use a diesel bus, which is better than a petrol bus, and use a study that shows that. Again, it's all pretty straightforward stuff, but that's the minimum standard now you have to put in. Use a table there maybe and demonstrate each of those things and what it is, what the usage was, what your mitigation was, and maybe what the result was against last year. Consider everything, quantifying everything. If you want to be best practice in this space, you really do need to understand your carbon footprint. It's as simple as that now. I use a calculator off the website carbonneutral.com.au. It's pretty good for tourism businesses. You can pop in there all your usage, so your vehicle usage, your electricity, your gas, your waste, because obviously a lot of especially organic waste produces greenhouse gases, and you put in there also flights and that sort of stuff. It captures pretty well. It's not that hard to actually do that measurement now, and then My camel guys and my adventure traction guys, and both in the last year have become completely carbon neutral by offsetting the stuff that they couldn't, that they did produce at the end of the year. The most expensive for one of them was, I think, about $700-800. It's $15 a ton to offset through Green Fleet. So you might find through what you do that, and if it can't be everything, at least even, if you operate something that uses a lot of electricity just for the nature of it, or guests use a lot of electricity, then come up with ways for guests to offset themselves if they can. That's what they'll be looking for here, saying, well, on our website or part of we know our average guest usage is, this much of a ton. So if they, a bit like the flights, if they paid $5, they'd actually all offset, they'd have offset their usage. So, and then you might be able to, like with Qantas and the flights and those sorts of things, where they're showing that, that I think Qantas are up to about 30-40% of most people are offsetting their flights for a few bucks. I do it for every flight now, just so I can say, hand on my heart, I at least trying something. With a home office, I'm limited, but I guess I do travel quite regularly. Usually I'm on a plane every couple of weeks. So across the year, it does add up. And then I just think, well, as long as I pay that little incremental bit each week or each flight, then it adds up, and I've offset all that major impact. The rest of this question is also asking about what you do to train your staff and get them involved in an environmental philosophy and thinking, and to help you with your efforts, and then also how you educate your guests. So you have to put that in here as well, and just examples of how you do that. And then also any other conservation activities that you might support around, either on your property or in your community, has to be dropped in here as well. So it could be land care or reef care type stuff, or that sort of thing. As I said, I use Green Fleet with my guys, mainly because we've done quite a bit of research and they seem to be the best for offsetting carbon in the country. In Queensland, they have multiple plantations and they have reef activities. I know Lady Elliot used a reef one in particular that they contribute to, so they did some extensive research and all their offsetting stuff. They came up with one of Green Fleet's initiatives, which is specifically for the reef. So they're pretty good, and they're, I know some people say, well, planting trees doesn't completely do it, but it's the best standard we have at the moment. It's what we're using. And hopefully down the track, we'll all get much better at using, less impactful ways of powering our businesses and running our businesses. Any questions about the environment, guys? Nope. That's just a couple of examples, but that's just slabs of information. We'll move on. The portal. Now, someone can just let me know if they can see this, because sometimes it doesn't come through. Once the page is up, log in. The portal's much more user-friendly this year, much more intuitive. You log in and you have either accreditation on one side or the awards on the other. They're that well. Thanks for letting me know. You can see it, guys. Excellent. So you click on the right-hand one, which is the awards, and you'll see it should take. My internet's probably a little bit backed up here, guys, with trying to do both things at once, so just bear with me. We're nearly done, so we'll take 5-10 minutes to look at this, and then I'll just flick through to the page with my email on it. So this is what it looks like when you get into the portal. This is one of my clients. There's nothing in here, so you won't see anything. So you have things like details that you'll click on here, and you'll drop in all your standard detail. I've just put in TBA. We'll put all this in later. Where you are, all your details, your category, update. Sit down. Sorry, that's my dog, guys. Sit down. You see another dog outside. And we go to start entry, and that will take you into the actual submission area where you drop your answers into the questions. Again, might take a few minutes. If but we can use that as an example. Sorry, I was just seeing what I've got there. So, yep, adventure tourism entry instructions. It tells you all the stuff here because that's the category these guys are in. But you will see across the bottom each of the sections as per the questions. You can also, as you go through, push. I think there's next, which is probably up over here, but I've got that thing and we'll get rid of that. So you can go, medium promotion is not part of your submission. It's actually just part of the information they need for the night. So you put your names of who the media contact is, who might be the trophy recipient. Promotional 100-word promo information. This is what they'll use on the night. 2 hero images and 8 other images. You can do this at any time, so I suggest you get it done early and maybe get someone else to do it because it's not part of the submission, it's just part of the process. Get it done though well before you don't want to have to be worried about uploading all these images, especially if they're up to 10 meg each, when you're too busy trying to get the content uploaded. So question 1, tourism excellence, you click in like this and the question will be there, and it's very much like a Word template. And so you would go to, actually let's open up this actual submission. And I'll show you when we copy and paste tables and that sort of stuff over. Well, the computer's not very happy with me either. Let's have a look at this one. This is just one that I'm working on. We'll copy and paste a couple of things over. You'll see it's very much in draft, but it's, we've got some information. So there's a bit of color, bit of copy, bit of detail. This is one for the field of lights out in Uluru. And you go copy, paste. And in it goes, and you'll see there the colors come across fine. It does go across the page like that. And it's laid out exactly as it was. These dot points aren't probably dot points by the looks of it, so they've just come across as elements. So you can redo those, but they're fine as they are. So I want to then pop in an image, and I go up here to this tiny little icon. I actually think it needs its own bigger icon because images are such a key part. And you just click in here, drop image or click. So if you've got it somewhere you can drop it, you can actually just drag and drop, or you go into here and you go, these are some pictures from a mate's trip to Japan. We'll assume that that's got something to do with this, and I click on it and I drop, and it will be resizing it now and dropping it in. And because it's a reasonable size, that one, it might take a couple of seconds to go in. That's still uploading. It's also slower because we're doing the webinar at the same time, so usually they drop in a bit quicker, and I used this image actually the other day and it dropped straight in, so this is obviously to do with the webinar slowing it down. But be mindful that you might, when the system has 200 people on it, it may get slow like this. So best to do it early, best to do it not on the last day. And even if you are left to the last day because you haven't quite got there, try and get up, maybe do it overnight, late at night. So you can drag the image out like that. You can see that it's resized itself there, and it's coming up okay. That's my mate Clint and another mate Freddie. Somewhere in the Seco. But you can see by that we're, and you've got the little, change the size. I'm not sure what the style does. Display, inline, break text. So you can use all these things around. So you can put a border and a shadow on it. I haven't bothered with that in the past, but we might this year to take advantage. I assume rounded means it rounds the corners, maybe? No, I don't know what that means, rounded. I haven't come across that before. Let's try bordered. Yeah, so it pops a border on there. You can see a little grey border with rounded corners, you'll see now. It's as simple as that. Putting in a table. Let's find a table from this one. That's a bit of a nothing table. We'll see if we can find one that's got a bit more. So we'll say we'll get that one. Copy. Go to the portal. Head down one. And go paste. And in it drops. Actually, you'll see that it's right up against the edge, so that's probably to do with the, because I took it and it's right up in here. Let's find out if we move that over. Oh no, I think if you set it in, then you'll be able to get it off the edge. But again, I don't think a judge wouldn't get too caught up in that. I mean, I would like that line there, so I'd work that out. But you can see how it's dropped in, and copy goes right across the page up here. So across the whole of the thing, but the table hasn't. So I would go through here and just go and resize my table. Yeah, something like that. And just so, yeah, and I would fix up so that it drops in there. So you might just have to offset that in the Word doc. Any questions so far, guys, about the portal? No. Pretty straightforward, and you'll see there actually the white on the colour came across nicely. So I think it was just a little glitch the day that I did it, and this was all white. So I haven't seen that. Yeah, it's much easier than last year. Last year was, forgive the French, but it was a real shit fight. It annoyed the hell out of me when I was putting in up to half a dozen for each state award on the last couple of days, and it was just took so long, so much quicker. Yeah, and just intuitive, and you've got to give QTIC credit, well, not just QTIC, but all the states credit for getting that, and they threw out the last content management system and brought in a brand new one. You can see up the top here that you can use all these things to bold, so you can do your own. See, again, though, if you've done it in your Word doc, it should come across. Italicize, underline, font size. You can actually manipulate the font size, which I find a bit odd because they want everything at 12 point. I would go no smaller than 12 point because there isn't a space limitation anymore. So while you can for captions go as low as 9, I would probably use 12 or maybe 11 if you want them to stand out. But yeah, to look smaller. And maybe for some of your headings, you might go a little bit larger. But you've also got the undo here, which is great. Obviously, undo is our greatest friend when we do something and we don't like it. But I just stick, it goes in and I think it drops in automatically at 12. So that should come up at 12 point. Oh, it says 14 there. Interesting. I wouldn't get too worried. They're not going to get too worried about the size of the font. But I'd keep everything at 12 or larger. Okay, a couple of questions. Just want to reiterate, older submissions required a cover page. There's just no cover page anymore, guys, so you don't have to worry about that. It's all just in the portal like this. If you're creating a collage, you better create it in your Word doc. Yeah, I would. I wouldn't even know how to start to create a collage in here, and I don't think it has that functionality. So I'd do that separate, and then I'd save it as its own image. And then you wouldn't copy and paste it across like you did with Word. You have to load it through this system. So you could drag it from the Word doc, the image itself, and drop it in. So when you get this, drop it in. But copying and pasting won't work, I don't think. I think you've got to copy it or drag it and then go, I wonder if I could right-click it. No, see, right-click doesn't give me the chance to paste, which it shouldn't for an image. So you just drag and drop or upload it from its own image file. Any other questions? In the corner, it gives a word count down here. That's just for this question. Yeah. If you want to know the total word count, you go up here and it'll tell you. It's the same in this case. Oh, actually, no, it's less for some reason. That doesn't make any sense, does it? It does have a few little glitches with the word count. I noticed last year that it never added up to exactly what I had for in my, yeah, what I had in my, so that's 644, and this down here is telling me 64, so I don't know the difference there. There are some glitches. Maybe that is the total, maybe that one's just for the thing. It hasn't been that before. We've had to click on that. You can click on this one here and it gives you a much bigger space to work in, so it's much easier. So that's that first one there. And then you're in the document much easier, and that's how they'll be reading it as well. Your words in tables are counted. They'll get picked up as well. I think maybe where you have things with, see, like this is in here where I've got this done with a slash, that will be one word. I'm pretty confident, and also hyphenated words tend to go in as just one word rather than two. And I think that's where some of the minor differences are between word and this word count. But it didn't go over last year. If anything, I was a touch under. So use your word count in Word and then drop it in. But if you do go over 12,500, I don't think it'll let you submit. And if it does, and they pick up on it, which I do believe that the organisers will go through just to double check, they won't read any words that are over 12,500. A bit like in the past when if someone misunderstood and put in an extra page, then you didn't read that last page. Any other questions about the portal guides? Anything else? What else? Yeah, and then you go to the top, and if I can move this. Oh yeah, move it over. There's a space. Actually, probably need to go back to there, and up the save up the top here's where you push your save button. Then you can go to the next section. But if you just go next section, it'll save anyway, but I wouldn't trust it. It's always done it for me, but I still wouldn't trust it. Now there are a couple of categories that are less as far as word count. Words in tables are counted, guys, so they are part of the 12,500 words. If you're doing the food tourism one, I think it's 8,000 words, and the categories for the individuals and volunteers are different again, but every other category is 12,500 words and 25 images. Any other questions? I think the portal works pretty well. It's still a little bit slow, but it is what it is. And I think it's a much better improvement on last year. And I do believe next year there will be somewhere where they'll say put a video in. And we'll be maybe the year after, might happen next year after, and you'll be able to put those videos up. But we are certainly moving in the right direction as a process. Okay, I think that's pretty much everything, guys. Back to the start. Here's my details. Whoops, no, try again. On site visit, I think we've answered all the questions about the site visit. They will contact you. They will come sit down. You have the right to find out exactly what they want to do. They shouldn't be trying to catch you out, and it should be a really positive experience. Not everyone gets a site visit, though. If there's no points allocated, which I think for specialised tourism services, festivals and events, there isn't. Obviously, it's not for the individual categories either. The marketing one doesn't get a site visit either. They might ring you in those categories. I'm not 100% sure. But the site visit's worth for everybody else 20 points on top of the 100. So it's a bit less than 20% when you work it out. And you should be able to get really close to 20 if you nail it. And most judges are pretty good with the site visit. As I said, if you have a negative experience, have a chat to Katie. It shouldn't happen that way. Okay, my details and the website. Now, QueenslandTourismAwards.com is where you get all the details of the information. And yeah, you should have got that toolkit that they're talking about now, which should have all the information as well that you need. And that website, that email address is mine, matt@thetourismsmith.com. I'll try and respond usually within 12 hours. If I'm away travelling, sometimes it can be a little longer. My mobile, if anyone wants to call me, is 0407 504 269. So it's 0407 504 269. Again, I might not be able to take your call straight away, but I will listen to it and get back to you as best I can. Just checking. Does it have a spell check? Good question, actually. Let's close this thing. I want it to come up. Oh, it's at the end, that's why. Let's have a look. I think it does have a spell check. Maybe not. No, maybe not. No, I take that back. I don't think it does have a spell check by the looks of it. What's that word count? Judges feedback. Export. So at the end, if you want to save everything, guys, if you've gone in and made changes and you go, oh, my Word version's now not the latest, you can export it here and take it back. So you click on that printer icon up there. It doesn't look like it has a spell check. I had a lot of words changed last year. That would have been difficult. I haven't noticed that at all this year. The only thing I have noticed, as I said, a couple of the dot points and that sort of thing, but the words, as we've just shown now, we've copied and pasted, have gone in exactly as is. And the formatting's pretty much the same too. It is a big job. But yeah, it's doable. And as I say, maybe try it from a 2-year approach rather than just trying to nail it and get a result this year. It's always good. I even say to my guys when we spend a lot of time, money, and effort. A bronze is what I'd be happy with. A silver maybe, and I'll be over the moon with a gold in the first year if we've never done one before. But even with my help, we're just going for hopefully a result. And if we don't nail it by the second year, then feel free to question my value because it takes 2 years to really get a good quality submission together. The hardest part about that is just getting started and getting the first year done and then knowing that maybe you might get something in the first year and then but the second year you really have to work towards nailing it if you can. Any other questions? Well, thanks for the feedback, guys. I'm interested to know. I mean, I know it's obviously me talking at you through a computer. I haven't done one this long for a long time. I don't, maybe never. I'm glad you hung in there. Especially the 30 of you, 30 plus that did. Well done. If you need anything, you've got my details, especially the email. Pop me an email, give me a call, and I'll help as best I can. If not, try Katie as well at QTIC. That's what she's there for. And if you have any specific questions about other categories, feel free to send them through or ask right now. Oh, good. It seems like everyone's got something out of that. Excellent. Time to have some lunch, guys, I believe. I said, yeah, I tend to be available anytime, so pop me an email. Okay, good. Second year we won gold. Well done. Well done. Excellent. Well, thanks, guys. And I think we'll call that quits and let you get on with your day. Talk to you again soon.